that period. Voted in Georgia. A guy took a job in New York, lives up there now, voted in Georgia. The 1993 NVRA forces every Secretary of State in this union to keep millions and millions of bogus registrations on their rolls. And in some of the cases where I've testified as an expert witness, it's not enough to election office, the Secretary of State's office, and also Muskogee County Elections Office. And I noticed the majority leader sneaking in back there. Welcome, Senator Dugan. So with that out of the way, we have representatives from the Secretary of State's office, Gabriel Sterling, the Director of Implementation, Ryan Germany, General Counsel, and Chris Harvey, the Elections Director. We thank you all for being here. I see you're short a seat. I don't want you to have to stand all the time. It looks like there is an extra seat between microphone 11 and 12 right there. You've got a seat there. Y'all are welcome to pull those around to be comfortable there. We do have we've got a hard cutoff time for our meeting to end, and that will be at 12:30. That is so that this room can be sanitized and prepared for another committee meeting that'll be in here at 1 o'clock. The intention is to give you ample time to explain what has gone on and to take some questions from the committee. I will advise you that the questions should be directed to me as the chair, and then I will turn it over to the presenter to respond to those, and you guys can choose who is most appropriate to respond. And so we want to have as best of access and as productive of a meeting as possible. And so we do have a little bit of a timeline, but with that, we'll turn it over to the Secretary of State's office, and I'm not sure podium mic right here. See if this gets thump your mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Heath, for inviting our office to this committee meeting and for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Ryan Germany. I'm the General Counsel for the Secretary of State's office. I've been in that position since 2014. I've had the privilege to serve 3 secretaries, Secretary Kemp, Secretary Crittenden, Secretary Raffensperger, and it's been a privilege to serve. Today, what I thought I would do, Mr. Chairman, if it is all right with you, is just make a few opening remarks to try to address some of the consistent questions. And then we're of course happy to take your questions. And I think, as you suggested, we have 3 people here. We might have to kind of figure out how to best divvy up those questions when that time comes. A few things I want to address to make sure I address before opening up for questions are some of the frequently asked questions we've received regarding the 2020 election, including questions about signature verification, absentee ballot drop boxes, and then what I think we should be looking at in terms of moving forward to further strengthen Georgia's election processes. And then, of course, we're happy to take any questions. Georgia has some of the strongest laws in the country to ensure secure elections. We don't allow ballot harvesting. We do citizenship check during voter registration. Absentee ballots have to be requested through signature verified applications or through a secure online portal that requires a Georgia photo ID to match what's on file with the voter registration office. Signatures are then checked again on absentee ballots when they're returned. So we, in essence, have a double signature match requirement. Absentee ballots have to be returned by 7 p.m. on election night. And my job over the past 7 years has been to ensure that those legal protections are upheld under what's been an onslaught of legal challenges they have faced. As those of you in this room know, Georgia has been the epicenter of election litigation in the country over the past 7 years. And we knew going into 2020 that 2020 would be no different. We were one of the main targets of the Democrat Party's 4 pillars litigation strategy. Some of those pillars were to allow ballot harvesting and to extend election day past November 3rd by accepting ballots after election day. In Georgia, we wanted to make sure that our laws were upheld, including our law banning ballot harvesting and our law requiring all ballots to be received by the elections office no later than 7 p.m. on November 3rd. We felt strongly about this. Not only was extending election day past November 3rd, in my opinion, a twisting of the Constitution to try to benefit a preferred candidate, but in Georgia, we're one of 2 states that have general election runoffs. So our election officials have to immediately get started getting ready for runoffs. And as the chairman alluded to earlier, they're busy doing that right now for, of course, some very high profile Senate runoffs and a PSC runoff on January 5th. Early voting for those runoffs starts December 14th. So, they're busy getting ready for that while they're also completing their recount of the presidential election. Fortunately, from the litigation standpoint, we were able to accomplish all of those goals. Our ballot harvesting statute was challenged, but it was upheld, and a district court judge did initially extend the period to receive absentee ballots past election day, but her order was stayed by the 11th Circuit. And that 11th Circuit opinion staying Judge Ross's order that extended the time period to accept absentee ballots, one of the things that the 11th Circuit mentioned was the drop boxes that our state election board allowed. And I know there's been some questions about that. The drop boxes, I have with me here, but the 11th Circuit said that cited drop boxes as one reason why we didn't need to extend election day past. We didn't need to receive the receipt. We didn't need to extend the ballot receipt deadline past election day. So I think that turned out to be a good thing. I have with me here, I don't know if all of y'all can see it, but I'll hold it up. Our drop boxes are, of course, required to be under 24/7 video surveillance. And each of them have to post a notice that says, notice this location is under video surveillance. Only the following individuals may possess or deliver an absentee ballot: the voter, him or herself. The voters, it lists the approved family members, mother, father, grandparent, etc. An individual residing in the same household, or a caretaker of a voter with disabilities. And it also cites warning: unauthorized possession of an absentee ballot violates Georgia law and is punishable by up to a fine of $10,000 or a term of imprisonment up to 10 years, or both. And it cites that willfully destroying, defacing, or delaying delivery of any ballot violates Georgia law. This is the notice that's posted on each secure drop box. You may have seen some of them in your counties. Obviously, video surveillance and this notice are higher levels of security than what's required around your usual USPS drop box. And so, we think that the drop boxes worked well. Regarding signature verification on absentee ballots and absentee ballot applications. First, elections in Georgia are run by local communities in each of our 159 counties. Within those communities, elections are overseen by a bipartisan board of elections and registrations, or in the 30-something counties where elections are run by the probate judge, the voter registration and absentee ballot signature verification function are overseen by a bipartisan board of registrars. And there's a reason that elections in each county are run by a bipartisan board. It's to ensure that each political party has a voice and direct supervision and access into every part of the process. These bipartisan boards have hire and fire authority in their counties. They can appoint absentee ballot clerks, and they oversee procedures to ensure that state law and regulations are being followed, including verification of signatures on absentee ballots and absentee ballot applications. We received quite a bit of questions before the election, for the November election, and also currently, about whether or not the signature verification process is public. The answer to that is yes. Our Georgia code states that election officials must perform their duties in public. And what we told people before the election was, it's public. Now that doesn't mean, it means you can be in the room. It doesn't mean you get to look over someone's shoulder, and it doesn't mean you get a vote necessarily. But the bipartisan Board of Elections, they have direct access to everything, including their Republican members and the Democrat members. And they do get a vote. It's in fact, they're the people who are charged with verifying that. So it's both public for public observation, and it's open to each political party through direct intervention and oversight through their representatives on each county Board of Elections or registration. One question that we have received a lot is about a signature match settlement agreement that we entered into in February or March of this year. That we entered into a settlement agreement. The Democratic Party, DNC, and I think DSCC had challenged our signature match law, asserting that it was unconstitutional. So, we really wanted to make sure that that check was upheld. So we were able to settle the case, and one of our main goals in settling that case was to ensure that Election Day was not extended. We saw this in post-election in 2018 when federal judges, right after the election, ordered counties to go back and do things or allow additional time for things, and we wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Because we think it's a twisting of our law, and because it's not something that counties really have time to do in terms of good election administration. So we were able to settle that case by doing one thing we had already planned to do, which was define the timeline when a county had to get out notice of a signature issue on a ballot. There's a law passed, as you guys well know, in 2019 that introduced a cure period for absentee ballots that had signature issues. That was something that had been going around the country, and for absentee ballots that didn't have a cure period, they were basically getting struck down all around the country. So we added that cure period to make sure that our signature match laws were upheld. The state election board passed a rule that said you have to get out the notice of a signature issue to the voter within 3 days, or if it's within 11 days of election day, within the next day, because we wanted to ensure that the voters had time to do that. We wanted to ensure that judges didn't say at the end of the day, oh, there's not enough time, we need to extend this cure period time past the Friday after election day. So we did that. And the other thing that we agreed to do in that settlement agreement was put out an official election bulletin, which that's something that our office sends to counties. It's not a law, it's not a regulation passed by the state election board. It's basically us talking to counties and saying, hey, here's something we think you need to know. Here's our recommendation on how to best follow Georgia law. The first sentence of that official election bulletin said, counties, and I left it downstairs, I apologize, but it said counties are required to verify signatures on absentee ballot applications and absentee ballots on both the signature in eNet, which is our voter registration system, and the signature on the absentee ballot application. And if the signature doesn't match, you follow the process set out in OCGA 21-2386. And we actually knew pretty well how counties were doing this because of all the litigation in 2018. And what we put in play, or what we recommended to them, was actually the process that many of your counties already followed in terms of doing signature matches. So that's why we agreed to that. In return for that, we got a release of all signature match claims for the rest of 2020, which I think helped to accomplish our goal of not extending election day past November 3rd. One other question we've been getting a lot is to not as a question, as more as maybe it's more of a request, is to perform a signature audit of signatures on absentee ballots and then applications and signatures on file. Our office investigates elections issues when we receive a specific complaint of fraud or irregularity in the process. We have over 250 investigations ongoing right now. Many of those are about absentee ballots. We have, and many of those will include a signature match of, or kind of a signature audit of the voter's absentee ballot application and their vote on file. One thing that we have seen come up quite a bit is allegations from individual voters that when they went to vote, they were told, "You have requested an absentee ballot," and the voter said, "No, I haven't." So that's something we've been looking into, and the voters is kind of understandably concerned. Oh, this is fraud. Someone's doing this for me. What we have seen in every one that we have been able to look into so far is the voter was on what we call the rollover list. In Georgia, there's a law that if you are over 65, or if you are disabled, or if you are a military or overseas voter, you can make one request for an absentee ballot and then receive an absentee ballot for the rest of the election cycle. And that's limited to those voters. You have to check the box saying, yes, I'm one of these groups and I would like to receive an absentee ballot for the rest of the cycle with no additional requests. So I think every one of those voters we've looked into was on the rollover list. So the voter was correct that they didn't request an absentee ballot for that specific election, but they had requested one earlier this cycle. And then they checked the box to say, yes, I'm over 65 and I would like to receive one for the rest of the cycle. So we open our investigations based off of specific allegations of fraud or irregularity. These, our investigators, we have 23 investigators. They're all post-certified law enforcement officers. They carry they're armed. They carry handcuffs. They have that authority. So these are law enforcement investigations. And so we want to make sure when we're opening them that we're doing it based off of allegations that are actually investigatable and not, feelings of I don't like the result of this election. If there are any, of course, and we appreciate the chairman's accepting of affidavits, and we certainly appreciate you sharing those with us if there's anything to investigate from that side. And we, of course, will. We're investigating out-of-state voters with absentee ballots. And that's a difficult thing to investigate because there's many people who live out of state who are completely legitimate Georgia voters. Some of the data we've received about this person moved and no longer lives in Georgia. Well, they have APO addresses, which are military addresses. So, they don't lose their residency in Georgia. Other examples of that would be college students. They don't necessarily lose their residency in Georgia either when they go out of state for college. So it really requires kind of an individualized investigation into each allegation, and that's what our investigators are doing. Before I turn it over or open it up for questions, I do want to talk about some of the things that we've seen this year from an election standpoint, and what we think we can do, or what we think we should be looking at going forward to further strengthen Georgia's election procedures. One thing we have to keep in mind that I think we've learned the past couple election cycles in Georgia is we have close elections. And over the past few election cycles, we've had people from both sides of the aisle who are really spreading things that decrease trust in the system and the results of our elections. And it seems to, that's basically been a bipartisan thing. It was generally from the left after 2018, and now it's from the right after 2020. But from my perspective, sitting in the same place on both of those, it's kind of eerie how similar the claims are. It's a lot of the same fact patterns that one side would call suppression and the other side calls fraud. And that's what we're seeing. But what we do is, of course, we investigate each of those and see what the what the facts are. But so I think our main job going forward is we've got to build trust in our elections. I think we've done a lot of things that are helpful for that. We now have a paper ballot system. So we went in after we did the presidential election for the first time ever, we were able to go back and do a hand tally of all the paper ballots. And that's using the paper ballot, the text on the ballot, not scanned by a scanner, people looking at what's on the ballot. The result of that audit, as you guys know, showed that the result of the presidential election was confirmed, and the original count was very accurate. I forget the exact difference, but it was a very small difference. They're doing a recount right now, rescanning all the ballots, all the paper ballots, and we'll see the results of that should be available shortly. Well, from what we have heard, we don't expect any large changes, and that we do expect to see some minor changes in the exact numbers, but nothing that will change the result. So we've done that, and the audit and the paper ballots I think can really help. One thing that happened this year that of course no one was expecting was, as we all sit here wearing our masks, is COVID. And I think COVID led to a massive increase in absentee ballots. But we got some, I don't want to say complaints, but more observations from election officials that they were being asked to really run 3 systems at one time with the massive increase in absentee ballots. And that's not something that's sustainable. In Georgia, we've had no excuse absentee voting since 2005. But up until this year, the preference of Georgians really seemed to be to vote in person, either on election day or in our 3 weeks of early in-person voting. In 2018, I think less than 5% of people chose to vote absentee by mail, even though we still had no excuse absentee voting then. This year it went up to, I think in the general election, about 25% of ballots, 1.3 million ballots were cast absentee by mail. And I think what we found working with election officials in each county, it's a lot to ask of them to process all those absentee ballots while doing 3 weeks of early voting, and then while getting ready for election day. So I think that's something we need to think about going forward. One other thing that I would say is it seems like it used to be, even though before this year, even though we had no excuse absentee voting, the people that were voting absentee by mail really were people that needed to for some reason. They were actually absent, they're disabled, they had some reason to vote absentee. This year, of course, that's going to go up because of COVID and people just wanting to stay home. But I think another reason it went up is campaigns and third-party groups who are really kind of treating absentee by mail as sort of a first bite at the apple, not as, hey, this is a resource you can use if you need it, but as a first bite at the apple to try to get everyone to do that. And then if they can't do that, get everyone to vote early, and then do that. And that doesn't really work very well. That creates a lot of work for county election officials. We had over 350,000 absentee ballots that were canceled, which means somebody sent in an application, it was reviewed by the county, the signature was verified. The absentee ballot package was mailed out, and the voter decided they wanted to vote in person, which is fine. We have a process for that. But then when they show up in person, they've got to either surrender their blank absentee ballot, or the poll worker has to check with the elections office, has his absentee ballot been received? And if not, cancel the absentee ballot to make sure it can't be received later. And so it creates a lot of work for people that probably didn't even want an absentee ballot in the first place. So we are seeing some of these third-party groups who, it's of course their right to try to engage the electorate, but I think there's also a responsibility to do it in a more responsible fashion, and we're not seeing that. Secretary Raffensperger has already said that he does not believe signature match is the best way to verify absentee ballot applications or ballots. And we're looking at what other states do to see, if there's a better way to do that utilizing technology. We've seen one example of that in our online absentee ballot portal that the state election board authorized us to make. And we've seen similar results with that, kind of like with online voter registration a few years ago, where what we do with that is the voter has to, if the voter's first name, last name, date of birth, and driver's license number matches what's on file, they can request an absentee ballot through that portal. It really helps. It's easy for the voter. We think it's more secure because it has that driver's license check, and it makes sure there's no data entry or other types of issues at the county level. So there's going to the address that the voter confirms. So that's an example, I think, of a better way to verify these, and we'll be looking at what other states do with that as well. One other thing that we've seen, with the huge increase in absentee ballots is allegations of people who are no longer residents here voting here. And I mentioned that earlier, we're investigating that. This is kind of unfortunately out of our hands, or even out of y'all's hands, but there's federal law that restricts what we can do on that front. The way it works right now, based on a law passed in 1993, when we identify that someone has moved, we move them to inactive. They remain on the rolls for 2 general election cycles. That's a long time in this, and it feels like a lot has changed since 1993 in terms of how quickly things happen, how quickly we can get in touch with people, but that law basically still remains the same. So I don't think that's for me, probably. So I think, that's something we always want to look at what we can do to improve list maintenance. We've done that, I think, through joining the ERIC process, and we'll see how once we get up and running on that next year, that will really help. And the other thing I think we need to look at is the state intervention into consistently failing election boards, similar to there's a process where the state can intervene in consistently failing school boards. We have a few counties that seem to always be coming in front of the state election board, and we've seen it with the audit and the recount, where we kind of know what counties are going to have issues. And as I mentioned earlier, they're run by bipartisan boards who have hired fire authority. We don't have that in the Secretary of State's office. The election board doesn't have that. I think it's a good thing that that elections are run locally, but I do think there should be a process where the state can intervene in consistently failing counties. And I will wrap it up, and I'm happy to take any questions. I don't think I introduced Chris Harvey. Next to me is our elections director, and Gabriel Sterling is the voting implementation manager. So we might kind of divide up the questions as to who might best know the answer.
Okay, thank you. That was very informative, and I want to say that I really do appreciate the Secretary of State's office being accessible to us as legislators. I know that every time that I've reached out, I've gotten prompt responses from you guys, and I have not heard of any legislator who has expressed any complaint about access to the Secretary of State's office. You guys have been very forthright with us, and we appreciate that. I think it goes a long ways towards developing this confidence in the election process that's vital to our democracy. Is that the conclusion of Secretary of State's presentation? I mean, you guys didn't intend to present, just going to answer questions. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let me. I trust that there's some questions that committee members may have, and if you will press your button on your microphone, to the best of my ability, I'll try to recognize you in order. but I did want to take just a quick break here to recognize additional senators who have joined us. Caucus Chairman John Kennedy has joined us. Kay Kirkpatrick texted me and said she was watching online. Senator Matt Brass was at the door. I think he is now watching online. Senator Larry Walker, our Vice Chairman, has joined us. So we appreciate that. You guys, anyone else, any other senators that are participating, I'd like to hear from you. We'll recognize you. And I think it's also be appropriate, I wouldn't want to leave out our committee members. Just run through that list real quick. All of the committee members are here. Vice Chairman Marty Harbin, our Secretary Elena Parent, Senator Greg Dolezal, Senator Jim Jordan, Senator Sheikh Rahman, Senator Valencia C., our Pro Tem, Senator Butch Miller, Senator Randy Robertson, Senator Tyler Harper, and Senator Steve Gooch, our whip, is also in attendance. I appreciate you guys being here and being willing to help us accomplish our goals here. I see a message that Blake Tillery is also joining us from his office. I'm not seeing any questions on the screen here. The buttons are not, okay. Well, a button lit up earlier, so I know somebody's button lit up, but I'll just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I think I saw Senator Robertson first. It looks like we'll go down the list. Let me defer to the Pro Tem first then. Which mic are you on, 14? 2 or 14? Try that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you convening this committee today. Earlier, you mentioned the 24-hour/7 video surveillance of the drop boxes. What has been your experience in retrieving the video surveillance, and has it been consistent throughout the process?
Yes, sir. Good question. One of the things that's in the state election board regulation is the video surveillance has to be kept for 30 days after certification or till the conclusion of an election contest, which there are numerous election contests going on right now. And that it has to be given to Secretary of State investigators upon request. When we just renewed that law, we added to the public at basically the least prohibitive cost possible. It's always been a public record, and public has made open records requests and have received it. We have requested it as well for certain investigations. We received a complaint in Cobb County regarding suspicious activity around a Dropbox. We requested the surveillance. We're able to get it very quickly and review that time period at that specific Dropbox, and found that there was not anything kind of untoward that happened. And then what we have, so anytime we've requested it from a county, we have received it. I know Fulton County had some issues at the very beginning, having everything up and running back in the primary, but those seem to have been resolved. What I have told people who make public requests, if you make a request and you're not receiving it, let us know, because that's something that we want to make sure they're publicly available. And a few people have taken us up on that. And then we've requested that tape directly from the counties. And I believe we're in the process of getting some of that. One thing that people want to know is, did people close the drop boxes on time? There's been a lot of requests for that, 7 p.m. on election night and later to make sure they close them on time. We told the counties beforehand, you got to make sure you close these on time, because, in this day and age, we all know everyone's going to have their phones out. In addition to the videos, they're going to have their phones out watching it. So you better make sure. And the indication that we have is that they did. We've requested some video surveillance from certain counties to confirm that. But we have not seen any instances of that, of keeping them open too late at this point.
So to summarize your answer, which was very thorough, by the way, Everywhere you requested the video surveillance, you received it, and the drop boxes were closed on time in each and every instance.
Correct. We just requested a few more yesterday, which I don't think we've received yet, but I believe we will based on our past practice.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, by the way, I also am aware that Senator Billy Hickman is online watching as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Recognize Senator Gooch on microphone number 3, our whip.
Thank you. Commissioner Germany, thank you for being here. I think I'll make a statement first. And I have a lot of questions. I don't think I'll be able to get to them. In fairness to all the other committee members, I think we want to get everybody's questions in. But my questions will probably be later. But, you know, I live in a very conservative Republican dense area in North Georgia. I represent about 200,000 constituents in North Georgia: Forsyth, Dawson, Lumpkin, White, Union, Fannin, Gilmer, and Pickens. I sit around the table at numerous places and have breakfast with bus drivers and contractors, construction workers, school teachers, common everyday citizens of Georgia. And then I also go to Republican Party meetings and so forth. So I'm going to try to build this statement based on a consensus of what I'm hearing. From the people that I represent, we have totally lost confidence in our system, in our election system this year. Maybe that's not a fair statement, and I'm not directing that to you.
I mean, that's how they feel. That's how they feel.
That's how they feel. And I think we all have a duty as elected officials that represent them. I'm their voice, and I'm here today on behalf of those citizens. I have a duty to let you know that this issue isn't going to go away unless we make some changes. And I've already heard you go through a list of about 12 things that you or Secretary Raffensperger has indicated he feels or you feel needs to be looked at or adjusted or modified. And I'm wondering why we haven't already done that. And maybe you've asked for those changes in the past. I don't know. And we're not going to be able to go back and change the past, but we've got to establish trust in our system immediately. We have an election coming up on January the 5th. And so one of my questions is, what can we do to reassure the citizens of Georgia that this next election is going to be a fair election? Not that the other one wasn't, but a lot of people feel that it's not fair and there was fraud. And you've already indicated there's multiple cases of fraud being investigated. How do we know there's not more? How do we know there's not widespread fraud out there? Have you initiated any kind of forensic audits on the machines? I've heard a lot of comments about the Dominion machines. What kind of external or internal forensic auditing can be done or should be done? Should we bring in the GBI? Should we bring in a third party computer scientists to look at the software programming of these machines? I'm hearing a lot of things out there, and I don't know, honestly, I can't tell you what's true and what's not true about it. I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing in Georgia. I've never seen this before. I'm 53 years old, but I've never seen the kind of mistrust that we seem to have at this time in my district. So signature verifications, why do we have them? How did we get here? I understand you said there was a consent agreement that you agreed with the Democrat Party as part of that lawsuit. Was the Republican Party contacted on behalf of that agreement before you signed it? I'd like to hear more about that if we had time. The ballot harvesting, you say it's against the law, but I'm hearing all kinds of rumors that ballot harvesting does happen, not only in Georgia, but across our country. What do we do to stop it? How do we investigate it? And what do we do going forward to make sure it doesn't happen?
We do have a few investigations open into ballot harvesting. And if you have anything that we should be investigating, please let us know. If your constituent says something, please pass it on, because a rumor doesn't help. But what we can do that I think will help build trust is, okay, I'm hearing this. Tell us what it is. We can investigate it and then see if there's something to it or not. The ballot harvesting investigations that we are having right now, there seemed to be some confusion in a couple of South Georgia counties where candidates themselves were actually going around doing ballot harvesting. And that's subject to investigation right now. I'm glad you asked about an audit of the machines. That's something that we've already done. We had a independent voting system testing lab come in after the election and audit a cross section of our machines. I think we've released those results to you guys, but I'm happy to recirculate them. And what they found was, no, the machines were working exactly properly. The software on the machines is exactly what's supposed to be on there. There's a thing called a hash value, where we know the expected hash value. If someone gets in and changes something, then the hash value is not going to match. And you can't, if you're going to have any kind of code or something like that, then or any kind of virus, the hash value is going to change. So they go in, they check the hash value, make sure that it's what we expect, and it was in every instance. The other thing that I would say on the machines is the machines, as you guys know, scan ballots through a QR code that represents the voter selections. There's a lot of allegations before the election. Oh, how do we know that this is going to be accurate? So what we did when we did 100% manual tally in our audit of those ballots, that manual tally is based not off the QR code, but off of the text on the ballot of the candidate's name. I mean, that proves that what was scanned matches what was printed on those ballots.
Can I ask a couple, just yes or no? And I will do that. The voting machines, when you go in and you punch on the touch screens, and I'm going to vote for a president candidate A or B, do any of those machines have any connectivity to the internet?
No.
Do they have a USB connectivity?
They have USB connectivity in the sense that that's how the machines are loaded, but then that's sealed prior to, like, when they're in use. So you can't, no one has access to
So
it.
do those machines get used to tabulate the votes, or is it just through the scanner?
The touch screens are just used to print a piece of paper.
Okay.
That's it.
And then when you take the ballot over to the scanner and you scan it, can it spit the ballot back out and then you put it back in again? Or does it go in and it drop in? 'Cause I'm speaking
Yes, sir.
from, okay. So my personal experience is that once it goes in, it drops down. It doesn't come back out.
Correct.
I've been told there's cases where the ballots have been rejected multiple times and they go back in, come back out and go back in, and that some of those machines could be programmed to count those multiple times.
So, you know, there's been allegations of that in Michigan. I think I just saw, or maybe it was Arizona, one of these other states. So one thing that I think was good about Secretary Raffensperger ordering the audit of the presidential election, the fact that that hand count of each ballot almost exactly matched the machine count proves that didn't happen. If you're going to scan the same ballot multiple times, you're not going to get the same count when you do a hand count.
Okay, so these are good questions, and we've got like 2 hours left. I'll get to it. I think we're going to have some folks that are not going to be able to be here today, so we've got a little bit more time. But I don't want to take it too much of your time because I know you all got work to do as well. But I wanted to go down to our minority party members. I think I saw some hands down there when I asked for questions. Let's see, which year on number 7? Let me get you lit up here. Senator Parent, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all for a long time. So thank you so much. And also, I'm sorry that you personally and other election workers have come under verbal and other attacks, which obviously none of us think are appropriate in any.
If you will, pull your microphone closer. I'm afraid if I keep turning it up, we'll get a lot of feedback.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
None of us think that that's appropriate in any sense. So thank you for all your hard work. So you said that you have about 230 investigations open, or some are closed.
Yeah, a little more than that, yes, ma'am.
Have any resulted in issues that would suggest any widespread fraud in the presidential election?
What we are seeing so far is what I would kind of call the normal amount of, I don't think fraud's the right word. I like to think about it more of kind of legal votes or illegal votes.
Sure.
We have about 300 instances of alleged double voting, people that voted absentee and on election day. So we're looking at that. That's significantly down from what happened in the primary based on some protections we put in place. We have about 70 instances of potential felon voting. So that's what we're looking at. But no, we have not seen anything that would suggest widespread fraud or widespread problems with the voting system.
No evidence that the machines switched votes.
Correct.
No evidence that the wrong winner was declared of the presidential election in Georgia. Isn't there already a procedure for the Secretary of State's office to intervene through your investigators and the state elections board in a county that is not managing an election properly, or via a court case? Aren't there two methods by which that can be accomplished?
So there is, the way it works now is if there's an allegation that a county has not done something properly, we open an investigation that goes in front of the state election board. The state election board will, if they concur that it's been a violation, refer to the AG's office. And that usually results in a fine to the election board or a consent order where we put in place things to try to fix it. There's not a mechanism basically for state intervention to say, you know what, you guys keep on failing. So something more needs to change rather than just dealing with specific specific kind of case by case interventions.
So there is a method by which changes could be forced and questions could be raised in procedures, but you cannot currently take over an entire county's system.
I don't know if I would agree with the way you put the first thing, but there's
a procedure for you to address problems that you have identified in a particular county's management of their elections currently. And if the state elections board agreed with you, then that could happen?
It goes through the state election board, and it's really a kind of post hoc, individualized, here's what needs to be done to fix that one issue.
Thank you. Would you agree that there was a significant decrease in issues reported with Fulton County for the November election versus the June election?
Yes.
One last thing. Is it not the case? I understand your characterization of the left questioning elections after 2018 and the right after 2020. But I want to just raise something and ask you and push back a little bit, because is it not the case that there were lawsuits filed that federal judges agreed with that were showing that eligible voters were unable to cast ballots after 2018? And indeed, we changed the law to reflect that right here in 2019. And that here there have not been successful court challenges or evidence raised in the same fashion. Would you agree with me?
No. I would say that in not one single one of those cases after 2018 was a single eligible voter shown not to have been able to vote. You're correct that some federal judges entered some relief. There was a bunch of court cases brought this year. Some federal judges entered some relief. Then it was stayed by the 11th Circuit. Well,
that was different though, because that was like a sort of pre-voting lawsuit that you described earlier, right?
Well,
what I'm saying is there was relief granted by federal judges after 2018's election. And we don't need to debate it. I just wanted to lay out there that
I will say, from my perspective, in the same place, it is eerie how similar it feels, the allegations made after 2018 and the allegations that are being made now.
Okay. Now I wanted to address one thing that the whip raised. I recall arguing quite strongly in whatever year it was, 2019, I think, that we should purchase a less expensive, more secure system in line with what the computer science experts and others were telling us. And that was not agreed with. So it's very interesting sitting here now, all these attacks on Dominion. And as you've already stated, there is no evidence that votes were switched, and we were able to look at the readable text. So I'm not at all arguing that there's an issue there with the way this election was conducted. But I want to tell the whip, I still believe we could have gotten a less expensive, more secure system. And to the extent that anyone wants to discuss that in the majority party, I would be happy to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Get that microphone off. Before we drift, no, I'm picking on you. You know, I'll point out that Senator Parent has been very helpful to me in this process and trying to get witnesses here, and I appreciate your help. Let me also mention 3 more senators that I'm aware of joining us. Senator-elect Russ Goodman is joining us. Senator-elect Sheila McNeil and Senator Brandon Beach was in the room just a moment ago. So we welcome them as well. And let me also, before I forget again, outside on the table with where you can get the affidavits is a list of some other places that you can file reports of election irregularities or observations or what have you. So that is available. If members of the committee want a copy of this, we'll be sure to get you one. But just wanted to make that announcement. I think the next hand that I saw was Senator Robertson. On microphone 2. You're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Germany, thank you for coming down. I know you guys have been really busy. I appreciate how responsive your office has been. Mr. Teasley is always standing ready. When I called him on his cell phone, once he realized that the people using his cell phone number were actually friends after a while. And I appreciate the effort Mr. Sterling's put out as a PIO for 8 years. I understand the heat that comes from a lot of these situations. But you made a comment when you first started discussing the 2018 election because of the absolute chaos that occurred there, that y'all knew that 2020 would be no exception. So
I would not say that there was absolute chaos in 2018.
Well, and
there was a lot of people making claims,
right.
But in terms of the election process,
Right.
I would say that it was very orderly and regular.
And I'm thinking inside the silo, it always seems that way. Out amongst the individuals that vote, the constituents that we represent, it's a little more chaotic than that. And I think even today we can say that. As much control as I think your office has shown, the Secretary of State's office has shown, what you guys are getting into the office are a lot of times filtered from what we're experiencing out there. And I think the whip pointed that out perfectly when he talked about going out and having breakfast and coffee with constituents in certain parts, and the information that they receive and where they receive it from really doesn't matter, but it causes a lot of chaos and a lot of concern. So, but to get to my question is, knowing that there were issues in 2016 and coming into 2020, what did y'all take? What actions did you take? Was there a crisis management plan put together? Because I've sat on a State Board of Elections call And a member of the board, I believe it was, or it may have been a member of your office, rattled off a dissertation of claims and false claims that were out into the community. And of course, he discounted each one with what I believe to be facts that you guys have gathered that these things did not occur, which is very encouraging. But the problem, once again, is the audience that you're reaching with that information is very limited. So my concern is, did y'all put a crisis communication plan together between the two elections? And if so, where did it tear? Where did it break? Where our constituents are getting 3 and 4th and 5th hand information, even from us in some situations. And is there a plan to strengthen that between now and the runoffs?
That's a great question. So I would say, you mentioned the 2018 election. One of the big weaknesses that we found was people were saying stuff that was not true. And then we had a hard time basically breaking through. Now, of course, one big difference in 2018 and 2020 is in 2018, the mainstream media took these claims and ran with them. In 2020, they're not, but the right-wing media is. And that's where, some of your constituents obviously get their information. What we've seen in both of them, to me, is they're both equally wrong. In 2018, these guys were wrong. In 2020, these guys are wrong. So we did have, I think, you guys have probably seen Secretary Raffensperger's face on TV. We had a plan for trying to get out accurate information, trying to get trusted information. We're going to keep doing that. That's part of our updates to you guys. That's part of our twice daily press conferences to the press. And so I think what's really difficult is when, it happened in 2018 and it's happening now. If people don't want to listen to you, it doesn't matter what you're saying.
Well, and I agree with you. The problem is talking to the mainstream media, you're not communicating with the public. And talking to me in another part, you're not talking to the constituents. Like I said, every time Mr. Sterling's got up and gave a presser, whether I understood everything he was saying, I agreed with everything he was saying, but he did an incredible job. So I think it's probably beholden on the Secretary of State's office. Y'all need to build a communication platform, a plan to go directly to, because when a constituent asked me about Dominion, which I supported and I still support today and think it was the absolute best equipment out there for this election and for future elections, that when they call me and ask me about it, I refer them to the SOS page so they can read the RFP. And what I would love to do is when they ask for the questions about all of these conspiracies, y'all have answered a lot of them. Like I said, in the State Board of Elections meeting, a lot of them were answered. Put that information out through in a professional, cohesive way, so that the almost 1,000 emails I was getting daily at the beginning of this, my AA, who's been threatened and everything else, can direct people to the experts and get the information directly. In that way, we get rid of a lot of this garbage, this kudzu that's out there that we're all getting wrapped up in. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Let me give you a little bit of an update where we are. Senator Robertson, I'm actually going to recognize you here in just a second. So as I said, we've been working for about 4 weeks on getting people from various counties here to testify today. And as the meeting notice stated, we reached out to DeKalb County, to Fulton County, to the Secretary of State's office. After that, Senator Robertson suggested bringing in Muskogee County. He reached out to them, and we had hoped to have them here. But I understand there's been a problem this morning that will not be able to attend. So can you just share with us sort of what's going on there very briefly?
Yeah, they finished up with the recount yesterday, and I think she got an email from the SOS saying that they had to get certification done by the end of business today. And so Nancy Bourne was going to be in Muskogee County and in Columbus doing that. And my whole purpose for inviting Ms. Boren here is that consistently she has been recognized as one of the absolute cream of the crop registrars dealing with a city of approximately 200,000 people that can get fairly chaotic during elections. And Ms. Boren has just been the absolute example of how elections are managed. And so my reason for reaching out to the chairman, and I appreciate him agreeing with me, was to have a standard shown so that we could see those that are failing to reach that standard a little clearer when they talked about how they ran elections. And I do apologize, but as professional as she is, she follows advice and she follows the rules and regulations. And I just appreciate her agreeing to start with, but I completely understand why she wasn't able to be here.
Nancy Boren is undoubtedly one of the best election directors in our state.
Yeah, and I thought for that reason it would be good to hear from her. But so here's where we stand. Fulton County, I'm having a little bit of trouble keeping up with this, but Fulton County is here. They're going to present to us. We had 3 hours allocated for our meeting. We're approaching an hour and a half into the meeting. My plan is to continue. If you guys will give us another 17 minutes, we'll continue with some question and answer with the Secretary of State. Then we're going to bring in Fulton County. We'll go through the same process with them. Senator C, you had asked to be recognized. I want to get your questions, if you will, and then I've got a few that I think will be good for the whole that I'd like to pose. So, Senator C, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you first and foremost for requiring masks in our meeting. I really do appreciate that, and I thank you all because it makes a world of difference when you're talking nationally how Georgia looks. But I want to take us back for a second. I was elected to the House and I got my training and I came to the Senate, and that's the year that Georgians elected a Democratic Senate, but a Republican governor who was Sonny Perdue. We can't forget we got 4 switchers that changed the voters' input at that time. The voters had elected a Democratic Senate, but we had 4 switchers to switch, and that made it Republican. Through that era, I've still been here, but one of the things I heard in your presentation or somebody mentioned about the big change, I know Clayton County, where I live and represent, is part of that change. I want everybody to know we worked hard turning out the vote in Clayton County. Terrell Starr, if you remember him, Bill Lee, strong Democrats. Clayton County is strong Democrats, but working the grassroots and working hard, turning out the vote, helped get us to where we are today. I hear fraud and innuendos and all these other things, but the real deal is work, turnout makes a huge difference when you can wake folk up and give them a reason to understand how important the vote is to all of us. I just wanted to make sure that you all know that I really appreciate what you all are doing, because I have been part of leadership in a lot of national, because I started on the school board in Clayton County back in the 90s, where I met and built relationships, and to have those folks texting and calling me talking about Georgia gives me great pride, and you all play a big role in that. But all the innuendos, we didn't go through all of that when we got 4 switchers to undo what the voters had done in terms of it. Well, some of them didn't get reelected the next cycle, but we had a strong Secretary of State with Kathy Cox. I mean, we have had Democrats. And it's been a long process for me personally.
Senator, you got a
But here, my question is, are we gonna make sure that we don't just take it just because of the noisemakers? That's my question.
I would say we're doing the same thing that we have been doing since 2018, even before, when people have started, challenging the accuracy and the results of our elections. We just have different people mad at us right now.
Sure.
Thank you for your integrity.
Okay, I want to move as quickly as I can. I'm going to take a little bit of chair's prerogative. I think I got some questions that'll be beneficial for the public to hear your response to. So to try to move quickly, I'm going to sort of rattle these off at one time. We don't need a lengthy answer, but I think these are.
That's the second time someone said that today to me.
If you will, just talk to us once again about the signatures required for absentee ballots, how that process goes about to get an absentee ballot, and how that ballot is verified, if you will, when we receive it. And I think that what you said was there is a bipartisan election board, and those people have an opportunity to review those before the envelope is opened. And if they challenge it, it goes into a challenge pile, and there's a cure period for that. But I'd like for you to run through that real quickly. I think it's also important, sort of relative to that, for you to mention the My Voter page, how people can check the status of their absentee ballots, whether they've been received or if perhaps someone has voted on their behalf prior to the election, if that happens. And then I've had questions about going through and validating these absentee ballots. And as I understand the process, I think I'm clear on this. Once that absentee ballot has been opened and that paper ballot is put in the stack, we don't know which, but just touch on that we can't, even if you, at this point, post-election, you go through and you say, oh, well, this person should not have voted. This was an illegal ballot. Whether or not you can reverse that or pull that ballot out of the count. And then when an absentee ballot is requested, where is it mailed? Is it mailed to the address that's on file for the voter, or could I say, oh, well, I'm off on vacation in Minnesota and I need you to mail my ballot to some other location other than the one on file? And then finally, because we all do get requests to have a lot of things investigated, talk to us just a little bit about the requirements, the staffing, what you've got available to you, how long, if you can speculate a bit on how many man hours are invested in an investigation of a single allegation, how you try to group them together to pursue. Just give us some feel about those if you can.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the signature process, the way that works in Georgia is first, someone submits an absentee ballot application, and the signature on that application has to be matched with their signature on file before they're ever sent a ballot. If it's not signed, they're not sent a ballot. If that signature doesn't match, they're sent a provisional ballot, and before it counts, they've got to come in, sign an affidavit, and show their photo ID. So that's the first step. If the signature does match on the application, the voters mailed a ballot. And I'll jump to one of your other questions. It can be mailed to their address on file, or a temporary out of county address. So we did have that this year where people were, quarantining in places besides their regular address. So you can mail it to a different address out of county. You cannot mail it to a different address in the same county. So that's the restriction there. So if you're going to be in your same county, you've got to be getting it at your registered address. So with the absentee ballots mailed, it comes back. That absentee ballot envelope is signed on the back, voter's name, and it's signed on the back. If it's not signed, or the signature doesn't match, then that generates a cure notice that says, hey, your signature didn't match. Here's the problem. And what we have seen from previous investigations is when the signature didn't match, it was generally the voter. And for some reason, their signature had changed over the years. It might have been a case where, they got married, they had a new name, signature was different. So that's why we put in place the cure process, to uphold that signature match requirement and strengthen it. When a ballot comes back in, it's matched off of, all of the signatures that are available, especially if there's a question. For most of them, there's no question. You look at it, it clearly matches. You're good. If there's a question, then you expand it and you look at everything you've got available to see what's going on here. And that could be the application, the signatures on file, other signatures they might have. So that's how that works. And then once it's matched, you're correct, Mr. Chairman, the envelope.
Does it supposed to shut down when nobody's supposed to be counting?
I would defer to Ray on that.
I do not know the answer to that question.
It has to be secured if they're going to leave the premises for sure.
That's leading to what is it actually securing the count, even though they say that we're not going to count?
There's not supposed to be activity with election workers if there's not public view. That's the law in Georgia.
And the ballots have to be secured at all times.
Good. Thank you. Okay, I think you may need to. Do you have anything else that you'd want to point out about the video?
I think that's everything, right?
Okay.
That's everything for now, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I think we had, was it a Russell Ramsland that we wanted to, Mayor, that's right, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for giving us this hearing. I represent President Trump along with Jenna Ellis, and this is our fourth or fifth hearing, so I really appreciate the opportunity to get these facts out. We've had some difficulty getting a hearing, but I appreciate it very, very much. I want to congratulate our local council on doing such a fine job for us here in Georgia. This is just only the tip of the iceberg of all the good work that he's done. I'm going to present two witnesses to you who are in the nature of expert witnesses who have testified in cases like this at times in the past. One of them, Mr. Ramsland, is going to be on Zoom. He's basically going to show that in 2016, you had only 199,356 mail-in votes. This time you had 1.3 million. 2016, you had a 6.4% rejection rate. And this time you had a 0.2% rejection rate. In other words, 0.2. So when you had 200,000 ballots, you had a rejection rate of 6.4%. And now where you have 1.3 million ballots, you have almost no rejection rate. 0.2% is almost statistically insignificant. That alone raises suspicion of fraud and has been held as such in election cases. And Biden won the mail-in vote by over 400,000. Mr. Ramsland will also go through the Dominion machine, the Hart machine, and how that compared to the other machines that you used throughout the state. And he will also show you some very, very, I guess he would describe it as indicia of fraud. You had 96,600 mail-in ballots that were voted, yet the county records show they were never received back. Be a little clearer. Altogether, you had 231,188 ballots with no return record at all. You were able to cancel 134,000 of those. but you kept 96,600 votes when there was no return record for them. What would that suggest? Phantom votes. There's no return record, yet it's counted. That pattern has appeared in other states that were involved in massive fraud. I might say that a good deal of what I see here is very similar to what happened at approximately that time in Pennsylvania. In Michigan, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, people had been cleared out around 1 in the morning, been told there'd be no more counting. All the Republicans left. 2 remained behind accidentally, and a Dominion employee. And all of a sudden, they saw 2 big trucks come in the back. They thought they were food trucks, and they were very hungry, so they ran to the food trucks. Well, there wasn't food, there were ballots coming out. Thousands and thousands of ballots in paper bags, in garbage cans, in cardboard boxes, and then they were put on a table and they were counted for the next 3 hours. And there were 3 witnesses under oath to that, and they say that they were counted, and as they could listen, they never heard one time that there was a vote for Trump. All the votes were for Biden. They estimate somewhere between 50 and 100,000 votes entered at that time. There's similar evidence in Pennsylvania and also something similar in Arizona at around this time. Second witness will be Colonel Phil Coulson. Colonel Coulson has had the opportunity to forensically examine the Dominion machine that actually began to cause the problem for Dominion. That was the machine that was found in Michigan's Antrim County that had recorded mistakenly 6,000 votes for Biden when the votes actually were cast for Trump. And he can give you an analysis of the problems with the Dominion machine. And also, just a piece of advice, you've got a very big election coming up. I think you'd be very ill-advised to use that company or their machines. When you test their record over the last 12 to 15 years, I think you'll find they're one of the more insecure companies in this business. So let me first see if I can get Mr. Ramsland on the Zoom.
Mr. Ramsland will be via Zoom.
There he is.
There he is.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine.
So you are speaking to a committee of the Georgia legislature, and just tell us your name, please.
Russell Ramsland.
And you're a resident of Dallas, Texas, is that right?
I am. In fact, I'm in Dallas, Texas right now.
And you just give us your credentials, briefly. I know they're very long, so give us the best ones.
I run basically a security operation. We do cybersecurity as well as personal security. We have a number of ex-3-letter agency intel people that work for us in the cyber side. We have ex-military people that work for us in the cyber side. We have a fairly robust cyber capability in both protecting as well as trying to penetrate people's network to help them better protect.
And you hold an MBA from Harvard University, political science degree from Duke, and you've worked for NASA and for MIT. Is that correct?
Well, I have worked with NASA and with MIT. That is correct. Coming from West Texas, I don't always tell people about Harvard. They're a little worried about Harvard there.
Okay. So if we could go to page, just so that we can do this quickly, Mr. Raymond, if we go to page 10 of your affidavit, where you describe the comparison of the Dominion and Hart machines in comparison to the other machines used in Georgia. What did you find when you did that comparison?
We were concerned because we had seen some audit logs in Dallas in 2018. So this really started for us long before this election. And we started actually with ES&S, but we eventually got into Dominion because we saw many of the same problems with Dominion in elections that we saw with ES&S. So the first thing we wanted to do was to see what the effect was of a Dominion machine compared to one other. And we looked at it, or compared to a group of others, and we looked at it from 3 points of view. And the first thing we did is we tried to go through the 2017 census demographics. We got the 2020 vote count by county for the country. And then we also got the Election Assistance Committee voting machine information, so we knew what each county had. And you would normally assume that once you do the correlation between turnout and voters and counties, et cetera, and how they voted in the previous election, you get a pretty good mathematical model as to what you should expect to see in a Biden versus Trump by county vote. And then we went and tested that. And sure enough, we found that the model was pretty darn accurate, other than a few extreme outliers that we do want to now go back and look at in more detail. But the point is, we could see on a percentage basis whether Biden, for instance, outperformed by a certain percentage or underperformed by a certain percentage, what you would expect in a county. And normally you would expect that overperformance and underperformance to about zero out. Well, in this case, what we noticed is when we went back and looked at it, instead of all voting equipment all over the country, and we simply segmented out Dominion, we found out that Biden outperformed what he should have by about 5% across the board. It was actually amazing. No other we did not see that result in most other cases. So then we said, well, this is the election system. We got to make sure this is right. So we went back and we looked at it instead of percentage outperformance or underperformance. We looked at it by counties. And when we did it by counties, we found an even more startling result. We found out that if Dominion counts your votes, Mr. Biden got about 78% of the wins. And if you use all other voting machines, then you only got about 46%. So we noticed right away, again, the second marker, that with Dominion, he significantly outperformed any other voting system. And then we did what was called a chi-squared analysis. And I won't bore the committee with what that is. It's a regression of sorts. And it allows you to sort data into various boxes. And what we did is we wanted to find out, using this analysis, whether or not, again, Dominion outperformed the others. And it was very interesting because, once again, we came up with about the same number and we got about the same answer. And this analysis said that you get about a 5.5% bump compared to all other voting equipment as compared to Dominion compared to others. And when you apply that to the actual vote, then you find out that we're talking a fairly serious number of votes during Dominion versus others. I think I jotted the number down here. Yeah. We found, using our first analysis, that about 123,000 votes in Georgia would have been entirely outside the realm of what you would have expected had another voting system been used. And if you use the chi-squared analysis, you got to about 136,000. So either way, it was a very significant number of votes. We did note that you had 199,356 mail-ins in 2016 with a 6.4% rejection rate. And then in 2020, you had 320,000 and 154 with a 0.2 rejection rate. So that got us looking then at the mail-in ballots. And we had already done an analysis in Dallas this voting cycle and had found that after the county posted registered votes, and they do that by posting the voter record, so you can see a lot of data. You can see the name, the address, the date someone asked for a mail-in, the date they were mailed that mail-in, and the date it was returned. And what we found is that in early voting, over 57,000 votes were tampered with after the county had first recorded them as being voted. So we went and we did the same kind of look at in Georgia. And what we found was very interesting because we found over 200,000 mail-in ballots that when we looked at the voter record had supposedly never been returned. And yet they were voted. Now, about half of those ultimately got purged, but about 96,000 of those were never marked returned, and yet they were voted. To assign a person to a mail-in ballot inside the system itself.
Sir,
that's one possible explanation.
May I just interrupt with one question? To assign it that way would, of course, be fraudulent, wouldn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have no idea. You just have a ballot in the adjudication file, for instance, and you decide to vote it and you assign it to a voter.
How many times, approximately?
Well, there were about 96,000 of those that we found in, I think the exact, 96,600 was the exact number of mail-in ballots that were voted, but were never actually shown as received back by the county.
Well, I think, is there anything else you would like to point out? I think that's pretty complete.
I think that's pretty much got it.
So there's 96,600 votes that were counted, never received, and assigned somewhere. And these would have to be considered illegal votes, wouldn't they?
Right. And by the way, I would say this was not just mere oversight by one or two counties, because we saw this pretty much across the board. And so this was an across the board problem. And we also saw a couple other interesting things. We noticed that sometimes the ballot was actually shown as being voted before it was received back. There was a received back date, but it was voted before the county received it back.
How could that be possible?
Well, you'll have to explain that one to me too, because it's not supposed to be that way.
Okay.
We also saw a situation where ballots were voted the exact same day that they were mailed out. So they were mailed in. Somehow they managed to make the round trip on the exact same day. We saw it happen just one day after, so that you mail it on a Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon in the mail, you got the ballot back. We just saw a lot of these kinds of problems with the mail-in ballot, but it was the 90.
And what was the difference in the margin between President Trump and Joe Biden on mail-in votes?
I don't actually have that number handy. I'm sorry.
Well, if I told you 399,000, would that sound about right?
That's probably in the ballpark. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Are there any questions, Mr. Ramsden? Okay, thank you, sir, for your participation today. I will.
The second person I'm going to ask to speak is Phil Coulson.
Yes, sir.
Phil, you're here. Are you not?
He's right behind you.
Right behind me. Okay. Would you like to sit or stand?
Mr. Coulson,
why don't you stand and I'll sit?
If you would tell us, give us your full name and tell us where you live and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let us know what you want us to hear.
My name is Phil Waldron. I live in Texas, close to Mr. Ramsden out in Dripping Springs. So, my background is Army information operations, the intersection of computer network operations, electronic warfare,
psychological operations, deception, and OPSEC. And my point of view is looking at these systems is how to penetrate them, how to corrupt them, how to manipulate them to conduct strategic influence operations. And in my opinion, this is the American people are under a pretty significant information warfare campaign that's multifaceted. And we've looked at the Dominion system. We've looked at the history of these electronic voting companies, and they're all pretty well related. They're connected by a common DNA, which is their software code. So this all started back with Smartmatic. It was designed basically to keep Hugo Chavez in power in Venezuela. He invested, I believe, 28% of the funds to stand the company up. And I personally debriefed the son of a Cuban intelligence officer who firsthand knowledge two of Hugo Chavez's family members when Maduro was faced by a populist uprising after Hugo Chavez had died. Two of Hugo Chavez's family members said, "Don't worry, it's guaranteed. Our father invested the money into Smartmatic so that Maduro is going to win." So I guess to connect all the dots, Dominion Voting Equipment acquired a company called Sequoia Voting Systems, which was spun off of SGO Smartmatic. And they also acquired the Premier system, which came from the Diebold election company, which also used Smartmatic software. ES&S software, which Mr. Ramsland mentioned, has a license agreement with Smartmatic, and so does Dominion. They all feed information to Clarity Elections, which is owned by a company name called Scytl, SCYTL, which is headquartered in Madrid, Spain. They also have U.S. elections. Our team's recently uncovered, just doing basic investigative work on the dark web, but we have an affidavit to this effect that Smartmatic and Dominion do share a physical business address in Barbados at the same building, the same street address. So there are commonality in business links, licensing agreements, as well as the software code and the functionality. We began really looking at these as looking at the operators manuals for these software systems, and just like President Chavez designed them for, they're designed to control and manipulate votes, and that's what we found reviewing these things.
Are there any questions? Yes.
So, have you had an occasion to examine one of these Dominion machines?
Yes, sir. We did up in northern Michigan. Our team conducted forensics analysis on Central Lake Township Precinct in Antrim, Michigan on the 27th of November.
Would you consider it to be a very insecure machine that can be accessed very easily?
Correct. These machines have been shown at DEF CON and hacking contests, and actually elementary school students to DEF CON guys can get in under 2 minutes. The elementary school kids can get in about 7 minutes to hack into machines and take over their operating system.
This is contrary to the public statements that Dominion has made about their security. Isn't that correct?
There are about 12 different attack vectors or ways you can get into these systems. Everything from the server level to download CSV files, make changes to them, and re-upload them at the server level, to basically in the operating system of these machines. And what we found in Antrim, Michigan, is everybody's got thumb drives, but until you put one in your computer, you really don't know what's on there. That's a common vulnerability. And actually, in the military, in our classified equipment systems, all of the USB ports are disabled because of the huge vulnerability represented by USB drives. So when the Antrim County, actually it was the township of Central Lake, they had finished their voting on the 3rd, stored all their ballots according to the policy and all of their chain of custody documents for the software. They got called back to do a rerun on November the 6th. using the same voting data card, using the same encryption or the encryption software, but a different USB drive to run the totals. Their totals were significantly different, even in down ballot races. Presidential race, I think, was only different by a couple of 3 votes. And it was, again, a very, very small sample size, but school board elections, state propositions for spending and marijuana bills changed the outcome of the vote in the rerun from November the 3rd to November the 6th. And again, this was one small precinct with a total of 1,494 votes. And basically what this does is put this system outside of the specificity limitations set forth in the federal election laws, that you're basically only allowed 1 out of 250,000 votes or ballots to have an error. And the error rate was far exceeded the allowable standard for this software.
Have you had an opportunity to examine any of other Dominion machines?
No, but we'd like to. The company stalls pretty much at every opportunity. They've included in their contracts, and I'm sure that it's the same in Georgia, that they want to control your votes, and they want to ensure that you can't inspect their software or how your votes are voted, where they're sent, and how they're stored. As a matter of fact, we just left Michigan early this morning and testifying before the House last night. And Oakland County, if you actually click on their county election supervisor, you click on the 2020 election results, a warning flag pops up and says, you're exiting this site and you're going to Clarity Elections. So Clarity Elections is a subsidiary of Seidel, which provides the early voting logs to TV's, New York Times, all the mainstream media. Those votes from Oakland County, which was, one of the biggest counties in Michigan, they're actually controlled, maintained, and owned by Clarity Elections. And it pops up on the website. We're going to take you to www.clarityelections. And you can look that up on your computers if you'd like to.
So I would think this would come as quite a surprise to the people of Georgia or Michigan, or that their voting data is sent outside the United States. And also that their vote is being counted by a foreign company. Is that correct?
Clarity Elections is owned by Seidel, which is headquartered in Barcelona, Spain. Again, these companies have servers all over the world, and we came to the identity of, or saw the packet transfer to the server in Frankfurt. That was reported on the 8th, and then on the 9th, that server went offline. So we know from German cybersecurity professors that talked about the increase in the drastic increase in their traffic on November the 3rd and 4th. And he attributed the increase in traffic, in web traffic, to the American elections. So it was common knowledge that that server was processing a lot of American election data.
And one last question. Could you describe fractional voting?
So if all of us in this room, had one vote for one candidate, we would have the sum of the votes in this room. When the votes are reported to from Dominion to the media, they're reported in fractional numbers, 3 digits. So when you add whole numbers together, you can't get a fraction. When you calculate or have a formula or an algorithm to assign points to votes, then you get a fraction. So our voting results are reported in fractional values, not in whole numbers.
Senator Beach.
Thank you. I voted on election day.
Senator, you need to speak into the microphone because otherwise you won't be picked up.
I voted, Colonel Waldron, thank you for your testimony. I voted on election day and I got a paper ballot. I scanned it, and on the scanner, it said I was number 78 at 905. So my question to you is, Ms. Pick was telling us in that video there were 3 scanners at the State Farm Arena. Is there a drive tape or a flash drive in a scanner that we could know if votes were counted between 10:30 and 1 a.m. on those three machines at State Farm Arena? Because my ballot told me I was cast at 9:05 and I was number 78 on the machine I scanned it in. So should we be able to have some data from those three scanners?
So those ballots, the paper is actually scanned into a ballot image, and the ballot image is actually what is counted for the vote. So each one of those machines do have logs, and they will transmit to a reporting upload time. It's my understanding, I believe Tuesday though, that the Fulton County machines were wiped. I heard a report of that. I don't know that. There are forensic artifacts that can be pulled off those machines, but really the place you would get that is under the U.S. Code. I believe it's Title 46. All federal election documents, whether they're paper or electronic, have to be maintained for 22 months. So if there is an archive, those ballot images will tell you the date timestamp on those, but someone would have to get a forensic access to that data and those machines, the tapes and the servers.
And was Ms. Pick correct in saying there could be about 3,000 an hour scanned in a machine? So it could be about 18,000 votes. Is that correct?
That's the technical specifications of those machines are, depending on their jam rate, between 2,000 and 3,000 an hour. If they're operating great with a seasoned operator that knows what they're doing, they can probably get up to the manufacturer specification, which would be 3,000 votes per hour.
Senator Perrin.
Mr. Chairman, first, really brief comment, and I do have a question. Some of what you said, portions of it, remind me of some of what we heard in testimony in various committees in 2019 when we were considering buying this new system. Actually, we did hear from a lot of election security experts, computer scientists, and I don't know if you're aware, but Democrats argued repeatedly and strongly against buying these due to their complexity, cost, and potential lapses in security.
That's correct.
But my question is, you're aware, of course, that there was a hand recount using the human readable text that also held Biden out as the victor of this election. Do you have a comment on that? Do you have an opinion on the risk limiting audit done on every ballot using the human readable text versus the barcode?
Yes, ma'am. If there was 100% audit on actual ballots, which if that was done, that's awesome. The risk limiting audit, I believe, is a very small sample of those ballots. So
normally, yes, but yeah. This one.
So if the evidence that was presented this morning, the videos, if additional ballots were pulled in, then that's what you're going to count. You're going to count the ballots that have been injected into the process. And this is something, again, that we've seen in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Michigan and a couple other states that we're currently working on, is that there is there are huge breaches in chain of custody of the ballots, of the USB drives that run these systems. So yes, ma'am, that risk limiting audit could have been conducted 100% and shows the readouts. There are ways to detect fraudulent paper ballots. We can image those to detect machine printed ink spots. We can detect if they were folded. We can detect if they were marked by hand. There's about 29 different point signatures when you pick up a pen and you fill in a ballot, a machine printed ballot, mass produced ballot, which we have affidavits in Pennsylvania and Arizona that these machine printed ballots were injected into the system. So until you did a full forensic audit, you would not be able to tell which ballots were actually filled out by Georgia citizens or which ballots were printed by machine and fraudulently injected into the voting process.
Senator Jones.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. I know when the Secretary of State was shopping for, when we had to upgrade our voting system, I think we had 3 different vendors who came before us, and they settled on the Dominion Group and their use. Now in all 159 counties that we have here in Georgia, how many other states use this system? Do you know the answer to that? And what's been the feedback with other states?
Generally, there's a mix. So, for example, in Arizona, it's only Maricopa County. In Michigan, it's swapped up. In Pennsylvania, it was pretty much Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, I think, used ES&S. But the functionality and the systems are very, very similar between ES&S and Dominion as far as our research goes. So what Mr. Ramsland presented earlier that showed about a 5.5 point differential when you just isolate Dominion machines across the country. That's kind of the working theory that we were working off of.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. So I saw some looks on people's faces, even with their mask on, when you were talking about the fractional adding of votes. Maybe you can go over that one more time because it gave me pause when I first heard it as well. So maybe you can help me with that. And is that just with the Dominion program that you've seen, or
that appears to be the live feed from Dominion and Clarity. So all of those reporting, the fractional voting is there. It's not a whole number. Again, if there are 10 people, you cast 10 ballots. The sum of the whatever candidates are voted for should equal 10, and not 2.87 for one, 3.13 for the other, and 4 for the third candidate. It should all, equal whole numbers, and that's not what's represented.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Jordan. Let me see. Let me get what number are you on? So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have some follow-up questions because I'm a little bit confused.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Parent indicated that or asked you about the fact that in terms of the risk limiting audit, that there had been a hand examination of every single machine cast ballot that resulted in virtually an identical outcome as the scanned vote. And I'll represent to you that it was 100% recount, that normally risk limiting audits obviously are a small portion, but here it was an actual recount of all ballots. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with respect to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so after she said that, though, you went on to say something about, however, what we saw in the video about the ballots injected into the process. So are you trying to say that in the video what you saw were ballots that were somehow not lawful, that weren't real, that weren't actually cast by registered voters in the state of Georgia?
We do have affidavits of people who trucked in ballots from out of state into other states, and that.
And to be clear, into Georgia, because I heard
not into Georgia. No.
That's right. I heard a lot about Michigan too, and a lot about not North Carolina, which is part of the problem. But a lot about Michigan, a lot about Arizona, a lot about these other states, which some use some of the same systems, some don't. And as you know, state to state, the election laws and processes are very different, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And even from county to county, under the same law, the execution and chain of custody procedures appear to be a lot different.
It can be. We're trying to make sure that they're as streamlined and as possible. Obviously, that's hard. So your opinion is based on the fact that there are affidavits of other people from other states who have alleged that they've trucked in ballots to other states, and then your testimony is saying that ergo these ballots in this video must have been trucked in from other states and are unlawful? Is that the conclusion?
No, ma'am. I said that a full forensic audit would determine that, and do it forensically auditing the paper, the ink, and the ink signatures with optical imaging devices would be able to tell you if there were any ballots that were not legitimate ballots that were injected into the process.
And so then my question is, if these were extras that were just trucked in, right? Somebody just brought them in. Then you would expect then that the number of ballots would exceed the number of registered voters who had requested absentee ballots and or who had voted in person, correct?
Underneath the, within the margin of error, we've seen, again, I haven't seen in Georgia, so I can't testify to that, but we've seen in other places where ballots were segregated, separated, and discarded or not counted, and then other ballots were injected, and those were by affidavits that have been acquired by all the legal teams.
And so, for example, in Georgia, you
Senator
don't know,
Jordan,
just one more.
I was going to say just one more question.
So sitting here, you don't know that the fact that the number of ballots cast actually matched the number of registered voters that requested absentee ballots and then cast absentee ballots and or appeared in person to cast ballots, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Tiller, did you have a question? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Colonel, when you see those ballots being taken out from under the desk, aren't there 96,600 ballots that were voted, but for which there's no return? Could they possibly be those ballots?
There is a possibility.
Well, could that be a reasonable explanation for these unexplained ballots?
It could be one explanation, yes, sir.
And what about to go further back in Mr. Ramsland's analysis, expert opinion, he says there are 136,098 votes that have the indicia of fraud. They're in serious question based on the analysis that he did of the Dominion machines. Could it have something to do with that?
The machine vote is highly suspect. I think if I recall correctly, the timeline, the upload of votes.
Yes, I was going to ask you that.
0336 in the morning, of the 4th. Georgia had the largest single ballot upload, and it was from multiple centers, but it was a 200,000 ballot upload. And at 0336.
What time was that?
0336.
Did that include Fulton County?
That was across multiple precincts across the state.
Mr. Chair, I just have one really quick follow-up. One just real quick.
But I have other senators that have
I know, but one of the issues with respect to Mr. Ramsland that I want to, is that there was an indication that, are you aware of the fact that in the system, in our voting system, that when you vote early, it indicates that you have cast an absentee ballot? So, for example, it will say absentee ballot requested, let's say October 6th, and then it'll say received October 6th, but it says absentee. Are you aware of that?
That would be a question for Mr. Ramsland. Sorry.
Okay, and so could that explain some of these purported votes that he was talking about in terms of they were absentees the day, they were received the day of and then voted the same day? Or
So
requested
if
and voted?
in Georgia, if there's a difference in absentee ballots versus mail-in ballots, then there is a difference. If the early votes were recorded as absentee ballots, I believe what I heard Mr. Ramsland say that those were mail-in ballots. So if there's a distinction between absentee and mail-in in the state of Georgia, that would be a question for your election officials as far as how they tabulate or account for early voting statistics on the Secretary of State's website.
Senator Tillery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the mayor asked the question about the 96,600 votes that I was going to ask a lot more eloquently than I could. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I do have two follow-up questions on that. When you mentioned, it sounds like if we have done a full audit of the paper counts, 100%, not just a small percentage of audit, that may negate some of your concerns about the Dominion machines, but you then said we might need to audit the paper for what the 200-ish thousand or so that may have come in. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Again, there are so many ways. So I look at life as how to attack it. That's what I did in the military. How do I attack it? How do I defeat it? How do I interdict it? And if we looked at those, you can, we've heard testimony, and again, I'm not sure about Georgia on the processing, but I did hear it in Pennsylvania, I did hear it in Arizona, that mail-in ballots were opened by the time they got to the processor. There were ballots separated from the envelope. The signature verification was non-standard on the envelope.
To cut you off, I'm doing it just for time purposes.
Yes.
I apologize. I thought you said something about ink and where folds were and marks on the paper.
Correct.
My question goes to that. With the Dominion system in our ballot marking device, would that put marks in the same place that would cause some issue with auditing the way you suggested, possibly on marks on the paper?
No, the hand marked features of a ballot are forensically, it's just like, when you're at DPS, your state troopers do ballistics on a bullet. Every ballot has a unique marking parameter that can be picked up by optical sensors to differentiate it from machine printing. Even if they, try to smudge a machine print on a printer, a hand marked ballot is different than a machine marked ballot, and that can be picked up and with a reprogrammed scanner.
One final question, Mr. Chairman. I do not know if you've been able to look at Georgia's numbers specifically yet, but I'm wondering, did you see fractional numbers in Georgia?
I did not look. I just looked at the aggregate roll-ups. So I did not. Mr. Ramsland and several other members of the team did
That'd be a question
the work on Georgia. Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Senator Redd had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome you all to Georgia, and particularly the Honorable Mayor. I'm a retired veteran, and I lived in New York under your tenure as mayor, in particular under 9/11, and I want to give you kudos for a great job. But I have a quick question. From a financial and logistical standpoint, it won't be feasible to change out the Dominion system before the January 5th runoff. So if you had a chance to talk to the voters of Georgia, what would you say to them in terms of encouragement moving forward using this system? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would say there are controls that can be put into place for every machine. If there is absolute positive control of the software and the tapes, you basically put the software in position in the machines. You run a standard ballot, 200 ballots for one candidate, 200 ballots for the other candidate. Get the tapes out and make sure that they run right. And then you pretty much have a guard on that machine so that nobody touches the USB drives or the soft drives. And then every precinct can have a hard copy tape, and that can be manually added up.
Thank you. I don't think there are any further. Senator Harper, did you have a question? What number is it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to just a point of clarification to Senator Jordan's point about absentee ballots. I just pulled up I voted early and in person, and I think we do, although it says absentee, it specifically says absentee early in-vote. Early in-person voting is the way it is specifically listed. And if you go to the Secretary of State's website, it also separates those absentee by mail, absentee by advance, or advance in-person voting. I just wanted to make sure that there was a clarification that there is a distinction in our system of by mail absentee early in-person voting by absentee.
Thank you, Senator Hart. Senator Anderson.
Chairman, did I understand you tell us that someone at your level could hack into the machine in 2 minutes?
A hacker, yes, sir. DEF CON, which is a big conference, they have all the white hat and black hat hackers out in Las Vegas every year. But that's not me.
If he could find, if someone can hack in it in 2 minutes, can we find out who did it?
Sir, if there was a full forensic audit, then yes. But for anyone to hack into the machines as they sit without the proper authorization would be illegal.
Okay.
It'd be illegal for me to do it without the proper authorization or our teams.
And then my follow-up question, the 96,000 votes that the mayor's talking about, could they been, in this situation we in, could they been come in from out of state?
The capability exists, the possibility exists for them to be printed. We had voice recordings of an order being placed in China to print ballots. They were given the basic ballots, and they were, again, that's outside of the U.S. and outside really of our purview, but there are indications that there were fake ballots printed up and pre-positioned in places for injection into the voting systems.
In Georgia?
No, sir, not that I know of in Georgia. In the U.S. presidential election.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, Senator Card. Yeah, yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Colonel. I would just like to finish up with 2 points. First of all, Representative Jordan, you said that the Democrats here objected to Dominion. I should tell you that the best letter written on Dominion is written by my Congresswoman, Carolyn Maloney, who is a Democrat. And I really would suggest reading it. It's prophetic. She wrote it in 2006, and she basically outlined the history of Dominion and Smartmatic, the connection to Hugo Chavez. Eventually, she followed up with Maduro, and how it's a highly inaccurate machine. And I guess this is just a question. I don't know why that isn't discovered in due diligence. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, this is not a machine you want counting your votes. Second, on the so I don't consider that a part of an issue at all. But it does cast doubt on the entire legitimacy of the vote. And the fact that you have the power to do this, state law doesn't in any way prevent you, the legislature, from immediately taking this over and deciding this. That power, right, obligation is given to you by the founding fathers deliberately. The founding fathers felt in a situation, can't imagine they thought of this one, but in a situation of complexity, the best place to decide would be with the institution closest to the people. And you're the institution closest to the people. And you're going to have a very, very much better legal mind than mine talk to you on this, Professor Eastman. My professor in law school was Eastman. This is Professor Eastman. And it's very, very clear. Supreme Court in McPherson versus Blacker says whatever provisions may be made by statute or by the state constitution to choose electors by the people, there is no doubt of the right of the legislature to resume the power at any time. To be sure, at any time would likely not allow the legislatures to pick its own set of electors by whim, but there would have to be a substantial basis for it. And that's really what we're presenting to you, a substantial basis, even to the point that these votes are too illegitimate to certify. Either too illegitimate to certify, or you can look through them and certify them in whatever way you feel is right. But this is your power, your obligation. And I know it's surprising. I've been before state legislators who didn't realize it. And really, so do we really have this power? And then once reading the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, it clearly is yours. You are the final arbiter of who the electors should be and whether the process is fair or not. And the other way to look at it, it's your responsibility if a false and fraudulent count is submitted to the United States government. And it's clear that the count you have right now is false.
Thank you. All right, I think we're going to move on to the next witness. Mr. Smith, did you want to say something else, or did you have? Susan Voiles? Yes, Susan Voiles. We'll bring her in. I'm sorry. There she is. Ms. Voiles, would you right here? Oh, right there. She's right there.
Right here.
Oh, there you are. I'll take a go. Are you ready? I'm ready. Okay. All right. Would you state your name and where you live, Ms. Voiles?
My name is Susan Voiles, and most people call me Susie. I live in Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is in Fulton County.
And tell me about your being the poll manager and what you've done. Ms. Smith, I'm going to need for you to. I know she's behind you, but I'm going to need for you to speak into the microphone so that you can be heard online. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you may want to start over.
Okay. Ms. Voiles, if you could tell the committee here what your role is as a precinct poll manager and how long you've been doing it, and then kind of get into how you were involved with the recount, et cetera.
I'd be happy to. I have been a manager of a precinct polling location in Sandy Springs for over 20 years. I've mostly been in the same location. When they consolidated polls, however, they asked me to move to another poll. Then when they pared them down, I got to go to SSO2 again, which I thought was a wonderful thing. Anyway, I have never experienced in all my time an election quite like this one. I have never seen such poor handling of not only the machinery, but the chain of custody from the very beginning was so flawed. I went in on Sunday, and that's the typical day that we pick up our things. And all our equipment, our big BMDs, the ballot marking device, is supposed to be put.
Could you tell what date that was, please?
Yes, that would have been Sunday, the 1st of November. It's always the Sunday prior. And that Friday prior to that, our ballot marking devices are all supposed to be in the location of our poll. Up to that point, I had no idea that mine were not there. But when I went in on Sunday, I'm to pick up my poll pads, a lot of material. And the poll pads are really an updated version of the numbered list of voters. It's just on an iPad-like device. And it also has a place where I can encode the cards for the voters, the voter access cards. But when I went in, the only thing I received was my telephone. And
Ms. Voiles, I'm sorry. Could you? We've got limited time. Why don't we skip ahead to when you were involved with the recount on November 14th?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
On Saturday, well, I was called the day before on the 13th, Friday the 13th, I was called and asked, could I obtain two of my assistant managers, and would I be willing to go down to perform the audit? I said, yes, I would. Unfortunately, we had to sign up for the entire 5 days, Saturday through Wednesday, and from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. If we could not commit to that time, they did not want our services. So I could, but my other assistant managers could not. I did go down with another manager, and our first box that we finally got close to 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was 9:45, because they didn't have enough tables for everybody. They weren't prepared for as many as they asked to come. Our first box that we got was a corrugated cardboard box that was not the size of a typical file box, but it was just like maybe a book box if you were moving. It was bound together with packaging tape, and on the top of that, clear packaging tape, on the top of that was the seal that should be totally pressed down like a sticker from the Secretary of State's office, which should, according to the chain of custody, have the signatures of those who had prepared this box, who had been the last to touch it. Likewise, at the end, that would have been my responsibility once we had gone through the contents to do the same thing, replace it with a new seal with my signature and my partner's signature. We were instructed how we were to do the ballots, and our first batch, our first box contained 8 batches of at least 100 apiece. One batch did have 110 in it. And as we went through the batches, they were normal absentee ballots, and most of them were pretty worn until we came up to a batch that is, it was, my words were pristine. It was white. It was so white. And this is a typical absentee ballot. You can see how when it comes to you in the mail, how it's got many folds in it. These had no folds. You could see where it should have been folded if it went through a folding machine, or for the voter to figure out easily how to do that. But these did not have that. I was running my hands up, and I said to my seatmate, I said, feel these. They feel different. And when you have felt absentee ballots for as long as I have, yeah, the years are creeping up there, you know the feel of them. You know the feel of a real dollar bill. You know the feel of a play dollar bill, even though it might look genuine. But the thing that really jumped out at us, besides the feel of these ballots, besides there were no folds, was the fact that the first one that was bubbled in had almost a little eclipse of white in the bubble where you would bubble in. And in that ballot, I mean, everything else was right there. But as we began to proceed through, because we had to sort these by Donald J. Trump, Joseph R. Biden, and Joe Jorgensen, and then write-in if we happened to have a write-in. What we began to notice was an overwhelming amount were exactly, not possibly, but exactly the same. So these absentee ballots had no folds in them, yet they were presented as absentee ballots. Even if they'd wound up as a provisional ballot, which is similar in structure, just different type of envelopes, it would have been exactly the same. There would have been folds in them, but these ballots were exactly the same. And there was one in the middle of this stack that all of us at times have pulled something out of a scanner or a copier too soon, and the image is not square on the paper. And that's exactly the way one of these ballots was in this batch. It was also striking to me that rather than having the customary 100 to the batch, it had 110. We found this to be quite an oddity.
Talk about you were down there about
Oh, I'm sorry. Talk about the organization when you were down there and you came down there and on that, I think it was a Sunday morning, you came down there and you thought you were going to be down there all day and they told you to leave.
On the second day, we stayed until about 4:45 on Saturday. We were instructed to come back Sunday morning, which we did. We were very surprised to find no lines. What they had done was not only had poll managers there, Fulton County poll managers, but the previous day had had a number of Fulton County employees who were there. Also, the girls behind us, they were librarians, but they were Fulton County librarians. They were there to do this. So on Sunday morning when we went down, it was fairly void of anybody. We were just very surprised. We were instructed to go to our table that we had had the day before. People came in after us, including the people at the table behind us. We gave our table number so that we could get our ballots. We waited and we waited. The people behind us got theirs. They had over 3,000 from Sandy Springs precincts. The people in front of us had over 6,000 from another precinct. And when our box came, our eyes were getting kind of big because that was a lot of ballots to get through. When we got ours, we opened up our box, and the Fulton County ballot boxes are like heavy duty suitcases with padding on the inside and roller carts. We had the young man unseal ours, and then when we opened it, I was kind of aghast. We had one batch of the machine generated ballots in there from the BMDs, the ballot marking device. There were 60 of them in that batch. They were all from a quality living center, and which is in, I believe, southwest Atlanta. I do know it's South Atlanta. And all we had was 60. And we stayed around and we asked for another batch, and we waited and we waited and we waited. Did not get one. We volunteered to help the other people who had such enormous stacks, and we were told that we were done. So the thing that was also an oddity to us, whether it was the Sunday bunch, I've done this long enough to know the votes are usually fairly even. And this was not the case either with the absentee type ballots or, when you're seeing a stack where 98% of them are for one candidate. Those are overwhelming odds, particularly when you look at the overall vote count.
Were there other, when we were told to leave, was there anybody else that still left there still counting?
Oh yes, this was 10 in the morning, and that's why we volunteered to help the gals behind us and the gals in front of us or anybody else in the room. But we were told to leave. Some other friends of ours, Dr. and Dr. Roll, were told to leave. And so I suggested to my partner that we left. And when we were there the night before, there were pallets of ballots that needed to be addressed and counted. And those pallets were non-existent the next day. And to be told we had to block off so much time and miraculously finish by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning and not required for any other service. That was amazing.
No further questions of this witness.
Today, and thank you for working as a poll manager. As it relates to the ballots that you discovered that were pristine and not folded, I'm assuming as a poll manager, you're familiar with the process of ballot duplication?
Yes, I am.
Or replication.
Now, are you speaking if something was flawed and could not go through the scanner? Is that what
Yeah,
you're speaking of?
either flawed and cannot be read by the scanner, or a UOCAVA ballot that is printed on a home printer overseas and then mailed in, and then is going to be duplicated onto a ballot by poll workers such as yourself?
I certainly am, but if that were the case with these ballots, the markings would not have been identical through 98% of the ballots.
Well, couldn't it be explained, the lack of folding, could that, and the fact that they were more identical, couldn't that be explained by the fact that they were all personally replicated and duplicated with observation by individuals working that same poll?
Well, that the probability of that, I would think, is very slight, because why would 98 ballots have that little white eclipse on the very first presidential ballot? Why would all of them be exactly the same? It was very easy to see that a ballot had been replicated many times. One was hand done, the rest had some other marking device, whether it was copied, whether it was scanned,
So your testimony is that they just looked too identical. It's not that, I understood you to say the fact that they were folded set off alarm, or not folded set off alarms for you, where my more limited understanding of the process is that it makes perfect sense due to the duplication process that not every ballot would be folded. So your testimony is that they looked too similar.
My testimony is
to have been properly duplicated?
Correct. None of them were folded.
But
none of them, if something had been done, it would look somewhat accordion like this. None of them were like this.
Well, so can you educate me for a second? Because I guess what I'm not understanding is why those would be folded, because my understanding of the duplication process is that they indeed would be pristine and not folded.
Well, you would not have had the score marks in them that where they should have been folded by, if you're familiar with any type of mailing, whether it's a church bulletin or, your school report cards or whatever it is, they have wonderful folding machines. But they are usually sent by the printer. And I don't think it's the fold so much. It was the feel that drew our attention to how all of these were marked.
So your testimony is it's not so much the fold, it's that they felt differently. Is that correct?
That's what drew our attention to it, was the fact that they felt differently. And then as we began to examine the ballots, we saw that they indeed were different. We had already been through 600, 6 batches, which would have been over 600 ballots. And these were much different.
Not explainable by the normal duplication process that would be put done as a batch. All right, thank you.
Senator Heath.
You mentioned, I think I got this right. You mentioned a box that had 60 ballots in it.
That was the box on Sunday, yes.
I'm over here. I'm
She's
sorry.
over here.
You saw my head bobbling around.
Yeah, I thought you were
I'm
on
sorry.
something more important.
Yes.
So,
No. Nothing more important than what you're asking. So, yes, Sunday there were 60 ballots in our box.
and that box was from Quality
Living Center. And those were all generated on a ballot marking device, which is looking like a larger iPad. It's a Dominion.
So is Quality, I'm sorry, is that a voting precinct or is that?
No, sir. It is simply a men's recovery center. And that was very unusual to me also, because most of our senior centers have been trying to get at least one sort of precinct designation or early designation for the 20 years that I've been doing this, and they have not. So to have a 60-person facility.
So is this Fulton County made mention that they had some
Mobile units.
mobile units that they seemed to me that they were saying like they were mobile precincts, that if they had a issue at a precinct, they could roll in there with this thing and take over the work there. I had some questions about how you reprogram a precinct from being precinct 1 to be precinct 54, for example.
So I went over to look at the situation with the coworkers, and I was quickly reprimanded and told, Bridget, it's fine. We've been doing this all week. And I didn't know what to say because I had no authority. I was bothered by it. And I told the poll workers, I'm like, well, you know, the media cards was really important. The paper ballots are just backups. So it'll be okay. They're not going to need these paper ballots anyway. And I was uncomfortable and I walked away. I went back to my desk to print more test ballots. I had a break. I went over and just helped a gentleman pull ballots out, throw them in a suitcase. People left for dinner, just left the ballots sitting on the floor, unattended. I left that night at 10 p.m. and there was still a suitcase with ballots that I passed as I was walking out the door. It was completely unattended, just left there. And I was uncomfortable with it, but I went ahead and left. The next morning I came into the warehouse. And by the way, to get in the warehouse, you just had to say, I'm with Fulton County Elections. They budgeted you in. Anybody could go in. There was a loading dock. Anybody could drive up to the loading dock and walk in the building. And one woman actually did. And she was kicked out later in the day. So I walked out in that morning, and there were no Dominion employees there. There were probably 10 of us there, and all the ballot suitcases were sealed, and they were just stacked in the corner of the warehouse. And for me, I thought, this is just not secure. Someone could just wheel these. I could have wheeled them out to my car. I could have wheeled them to the loading dock. I could have changed out ballots. I could have done anything. So that was Friday, but I tried not to worry about it. Then on Sunday, it was my last day in the warehouse. And I was just sticking around because in case they lost ballots again, I would be there to reprint. But I had nothing to do, so I decided I would leave the desk. And there was no other people printing test ballots that night. I thought I would leave my desk and I would go out into the floor and help. So I was away for an hour or so. It was 10 o'clock at night. I thought, it's time for me to go. And I go to my desk, and there's a Dominion worker. And there was a consultant who had been in the warehouse that whole week. I thought he was a warehouse consultant. I've now figured out he's not a warehouse consultant. He was from the elections group. He was from Chicago. The two of them were printing ballots. And I thought, oh my gosh, they need some more test ballots. They lost test ballots. So I sat down and I'm like, oh, let me help you guys. What do you need? Do I start from the bottom? Do I start from the top? And the Dominion worker was like, oh, you can start from the bottom. And so I started. And then he's like, well, I got to go. Then the consultant guy who was printing ballots, I look over and I notice he's printing random ballots. I'm like, there's an order when you print test ballots. The purpose of a test ballot is so that you can vote for each candidate. So you either start from the top and vote for the first person all the way across, and then the second person, etc. This guy was just printing random ballots. And so I went over and instructed him, hey, you know, to print test ballots, you got to do it this way. And he's like, oh, do I have to vote for Trump? I'm like, yeah, you got to vote for Trump. And then he started printing some ballots, and then he said he had to leave, so he left. And it was 10 o'clock at night, so I just finished up printing that batch of test ballots, ran it over to the person, and then I left. So then I'm also a precinct manager. So I manage the precinct and I'm concerned over the emergency ballots. You guys passed a law that 10% of every voter in the poll book, you have to have an emergency ballot. Well, in my precinct, I got yellow sample ballots. They were on yellow cheap paper, said sample across them. So I got 250 of these. So I called the warehouse. I said, where are my emergency ballots?
I mean, I hope I don't need them, but where are they? And I took a picture, sent them a picture, and I'm like, yeah, that's not right. And we don't know where they are. We can't find them. And in my training as a manager, I've never been trained the importance of securing the emergency ballots. When I've gone into the check-in center at the end of the night, there's no accountability. In the June election, they didn't even have forms when they checked us in. They didn't have ballot recap sheets, which is the most important thing you need as well. But they didn't have check-in forms to say, hey, you turned in all your provisional ballots that were unused. You turned in all your emergency ballots. There's no checking. The next election, you think, okay, that was the first time we used the system. Maybe they'll get it right. So the second time I went to check in, they had the old check-in forms with old language, DREs. And I'm like, okay, I'll sign off that here's all my emergency ballots. Here's all my unused provisional ballots. So you think the third time they would get a form. I go to check in that night. They don't have forms. The girl at the Roswell check-in center said she just made one up. But there was nowhere on there to say Bridget had 250 emergency ballots and she's turned in those ballots. There's nowhere to say that my provisional ballots, I'm a split precinct. So I did have proper provisional ballots for my B precinct, but none for my A precinct. So that was concerning. And I did write my superior at Fulton County Elections, and she sent it on to her superiors, and I've not heard back about my concerns. I did send it to the Secretary of State. I sent my concerns prior to the election, and they were supposed to forward it on to the correct people. I went back to the Secretary of State after the election with my post-election concerns. I've not heard back from the Secretary of State. I attended the Board of Elections meeting this last week on Monday morning while I was in the airport, and I was going to give my testimony of securing the ballots, and I was muted 15 seconds into my presentation. So I feel like I'm not heard, or it's not a concern. I was also concerned about the Fulton County. Rob Pitts didn't mention to you this morning, but they had ACLU clerks in every single Fulton County location to process absentee ballots. I was concerned because my clerk was not trained. She was trained the day before. She seemed very intelligent. She's a lawyer. She wasn't trained to collect an affidavit if you're clearing an absentee ballot. I was also concerned that she was using her personal laptop, but I guess that's fine to have the whole voter database and who turned in absentee ballots and who didn't on your personal laptop. So those are just some of my concerns. I kind of went around, so I'm sure you have some questions.
Are there any questions from any of the Senator Heath?
No, I don't want to jump ahead of any of these smart guys in here. You just, a lot of information there that could.
I'm sorry.
There was a lot of information there that could certainly cause me concern, but one of the last things you were talking about, these emergency ballots, and you mentioned absentee ballots. So who all knows, if I request an absentee ballot, who all knows whether or not I have
watcher for this past election? I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak here today and speak about these important matters and observations that I saw in my role of fraud and other irregularities in the process. You know, there's a few different things, and I'll get through these relatively quickly, as again, to be succinct. There was one instance on election day where I was denied entry into a polling location at Birmingham Falls Elementary in Milton, Georgia. I was wearing my badge and presented my Secretary of State letter to the poll manager. She denied me entry. I pointed to the information on the letter that that designated that I was allowed to be there. She disagreed, would not let me in, and was turned away. I was also went to 2 other locations in Roswell on election morning. Both instances, which I was informed that Democrat poll watchers were engaging with voters outside of the elementary schools. This was at Mimosa Elementary, and both of these turned out to be valid as well. This was at Mimosa Elementary, where they were standing between the parking lot and the entryway to the school, engaging with voters to and from. And then also at Esther Jackson Elementary School, where the 2 Democrat poll watchers there had been engaging with voters outside of the school while they were in line, apparently collecting voter data on their phones. Moving ahead to the recount, the first one that is, in DeKalb County on Sunday, November 15th, I arrived at that facility. The observation process was very difficult. The tables were set up in groups of 16, yet we're only allowed 1 person for every 10 tables. So that was difficult to manage through. We were required to be 6 feet away from the tables and as well as the personnel, despite our being issued a required mask by DeKalb County. After growing frustrated with trying to watch this process, I tried to find somewhere where I could go add some more value. So I decided to stand behind a table where the 2 workers were actually entering in the signed vote totals into the Arlo system for the final count. I was standing about 6 feet or so behind the workers. While I could not see the computer screen to validate what they were entering into the system, I was able to read the sheets that the person was providing to them. So I decided I would start taking notes on that in case there was an opportunity to provide an audit or something that was necessary to cross-reference what was actually submitted and what was actually input into the system. After a while, I was able to see a pattern of what I would expect in terms of the vote totals. I ballparked that around 1,500. And one came through that was a serious red flag. And that one came through at 10,707 votes for Biden and 13 for President Trump. And so I turned to the person that was next to me and said it to her, but loud enough so the workers in front of me could hear that. And that was that 10,000 votes for Biden, that can't be right. And wanted to make sure that they heard that so that it would get flagged. They then whispered amongst themselves for some time, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, a manager was called over, and I followed that paper and that manager through the process. She went towards the back of the room where they take the ballots in and out and spoke with 2 other workers. I stayed some distance back because of requirements, but yet I could make out the fact that they were trying to ascertain what that vote total was as well and why it was that way. They also discussed about whether or not to make that change on their own based upon what they thought that the 2 counters had meant for that total to be. Although they did, I think they decided not to do that because one, they looked over at me, made some eye contact, and the conversation changed to a whisper. But at the same time, they were also talking about they could not determine how that error had occurred or fraud because the numbers didn't match up. It wasn't a decimal. It wasn't a digit issue. It was so significantly wrong. Later through that process, I decided to engage Mr. Tillman, who was who I understood to be the election director for DeKalb County there, and informed him of the issue, let him know the serious concern that I had, and that we discussed recounting that box. He went and verified that with his team, and he came back and agreed that that 10,000 count couldn't possibly be right. And we worked out an arrangement to where I would follow that box through the rest of the process, through the recounting process, to ensure that it was counted correctly. And we had a new team come in about 45 minutes later. I watched and observed that process. I think the new team that came in did an excellent job. And that final vote total for Biden ended up being 1,081 and not 10,707 as initially submitted and signed off on by the 2 counters to be going into the system. So 9,626 vote difference.
pretty significant. I also did flag the fact that, it's, I don't know if they have gone back to look at what those other two counters have done with other ballot boxes to validate that authenticity as well. And certainly don't know if anything was skimmed off the tops of the others, a few votes here and there, give or for any given candidate. But the egregious error was what I was able to catch. Going back to November 6th, these two incidents occur at State Farm Arena, where on the day that they were that they were processing the provisional ballots, the military and UOCAVA ballots on that day. Two things with this. One was after observing the process, I flagged it the next day in email and then signed an affidavit to the fact that I thought that the process lent itself and was open to significant fraud opportunities at 2 points. So what they do, is my understanding, as it was explained to us by Rick Barron, that what they will do with the military and overseas, the UOCAVA, is they will email a form to that voter. That voter then prints the form, marks the form with their vote choices, and then mails back that hard copy. Fulton County, they receive it, they go through a process of what's called duplication. And what that process was, as it was explained to us, is that a worker who we were not allowed to engage with or witness to verify its authenticity will then take that form and then is supposed to duplicate that voter's choice onto the ballot. This is all, in a situation where you're not able to observe it from a distance roughly this far apart or greater. Actually, it is greater than this. So no possible way to see it, and no verification or authenticity of the process that I could see and that we were told or informed about. Another serious concern with that process happens later when the ballots are then provided to another individual who actually goes and casts the ballots. So you are not allowed to see what ballot choices are cast on behalf of that voter that's in our military or overseas. And that, in my opinion, was an opportunity because there's no validation or observation or ability to observe whether that was done correctly as well. And then after I flagged that early on, like I said, the next day, and filed an affidavit to my concerns over that process. And obviously have since learned that vote total ended up being roughly 900 to nothing in favor of Joe Biden versus President Trump. So pretty alarming and concerning. On that same day, I noticed this is in regards to the Secretary of State's representative that was on site that day. And what this is basically entailing, I believe I've provided this information previously, and that is that the the vote count was supposed to start at 8:30. It didn't start until roughly 8:50 that morning. I first noticed the Secretary of State representative that entered the room around mid-morning, and didn't make too much of that at the time, but something told me, because I went back and looked at my notes and what I did from a picture standpoint, that something was not quite right, because at 11:45, I was documenting already that he was outside the room, leaning against the wall on his phone, texting or what have you. Now that in itself wouldn't be that particularly big deal, but something had struck me that I needed to start documenting that. As it goes through the day, approximately 1:35, I realized that it was the first time that I had seen this representative who was potentially providing oversight actually out on the floor with the workers. And the first time I had seen that was at 1:35. And I want to clarify that I got there at 8:20. I was probably one of the first couple people there in the room. I took the first table in the front row, and that's predominantly where I stayed most of the day. I noticed that as I looked around and wondered where he was at the rest of the time, I noticed that he was actually back in the corner on his phone. And so what I decided to do from that point on, and I should ask, and I don't know if it's proper to ask, so I apologize if it's not proper protocol, but I've submitted pictures if they've been made available. If not, I do have those on a jump drive that I have brought with me. I probably should have brought that up first.
I'm sorry, just tell us what you saw and we'll open it up for a few questions.
Sure, fair enough. So what I decided to then do was further document that this person was not providing oversight, just in case there was a claim later that there was, because my concerns over how the ballots were being processed. And so I started taking selfies over my shoulder, so I've got this, so I can validate that it's me. It's over my shoulder, and he's further back in the corner, just kind of semi-slumped on his phone in different positions. And I started taking pictures at 2:37, 3:51, 4:47, 5:41, and so on forth, that he was back there in the corner of the back of the room, not providing oversight or engagement or anything on the floor there. I did leave for dinner for a bit. When I came back, I had walked down the hall briefly. He was at the end of the hall on a phone call. I walked out. He was a few steps behind me, and he was complaining about parking. He was concerned about, I'm not sure if I parked in the Ruby lot or if it's the red lot. And if I don't know how this is going to work, and if it's the red lot or the Ruby lot, and the cost, because he was going to be there for over 10 hours and how expensive that was going to be. So, and then through the rest of the evening, he was predominantly at the back of the room, and I provided specific time points of when he entered and what have you for the record.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Mr. Senator Dolezal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was it Mr. Amick? I don't want to mispronounce your name.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. You've been doing this for a number of years, from what I gathered from your testimony. Is that correct? The poll observing?
Actually, this is my third presidential race.
16th. I, in my regular life, have been a licensed practical nurse for 33 years, and I got laid off from my urgent care job because of low census with COVID infections. Our census dropped at our urgent care center. And then we relocated to Georgia about 6 months ago. So I found myself without a lot to do and some time on my hands. So I decided just to do my patriotic duty and be a poll watcher. So I went through the training and I was really excited. And I felt like our process in Hart County was good. Going into it, I thought, oh, this is going to be solid. It was wonderful. I was excited for the day. But as the day progressed and as things happened, I became more and more alarmed. I have 4 things that really bothered me, and I'm going to move through the initial 3 things pretty quickly because the big thing is at the end. The first thing, and I'm going to kind of read it to help myself out. On election day, someone had turned the natural gas off to the building. And so we had set up all of the machines the day before, and the heat was working in the rec center where our polling place was. I understand that rec center used to be a barn that had been converted into this rec center. And so it's a big hulking building, and it was freezing cold when we got in there. That morning I had got up and we had been in the low 30s. And I had to use my heated seat in my car and my heater, and we arrived and the building was really cold. So they called HVAC people in, and the HVAC people worked all morning, and it was sometime afternoon that an HVAC guy came in and said that someone had shut off the natural gas to the building and that's why our heat wasn't working. He indicated that nothing was wrong with the heater. Some unknown person in the night had shut off the gas to the building. Well, we all cheered and hooray because the heat finally came on. And at that time, I did not know that Georgia law requires that electronic equipment be kept in a climate-controlled environment, which having it in a freezing cold building all night long, in my view, does not constitute a climate-controlled environment. I found this out the next night when I read Georgia law. Because of all the things that happened, I thought I probably better figure out what is going on here. And that's when I learned that the machines were supposed to be in a climate controlled environment. There is no alarm system in the place where these things are being stored to notify if these machines have come out of climate control compliance. And I noted in the Georgia election law that there isn't a requirement to have an alarm system. And so my plea to you is that I think you need to look at that and require these places, maybe free up some money so these places could get a $300 alarm system to let them know if they have in fact violated the law and gone out of compliance. I do not know with the temperature that night if they were out of the range, but in January when we have our election coming up, the Georgia mountains can be pretty chilly. So you probably ought to look into that. How can you verify if something went out of compliance if you have no alarm? I do know that someone in the night shut the gas off to the building and we had a really cold building. I don't know who did that, what time or why, because there was no alarm. The next concern I have is that the Democratic poll watcher checked in the morning and then left for the rest of the day. The sheriff who was on hand stated to us that he was sitting out in his car in the parking lot all day, which I thought was an interesting place for him to be watching what was going on. Our Republican poll watcher mid-morning was removed by an official because the supervisor could not locate her paperwork. Also, no one had supplied her with the proper paperwork, so she was missing for a while. I put in my statement several hours. I spoke with her after because I wasn't sure how long she was gone, and she said it wasn't several hours, it was about a half an hour, but she was so upset she returned to her home and didn't stay there and was gone for a period of time because she was so rattled by what had happened. The third issue I noted was that the special printing paper for the paper ballots to be printed on was not secured, and mid-morning there was a poll watcher walking around with this special ballot paper taking coffee orders on it, writing down coffee orders on this special ballot paper that prints the ballots, those precious ballots. She was taking a coffee order on it. To me, anyone can just walk over and grab that specialty paper and then get in their order for the ballots they want to print. All of that is pretty upsetting, but the worst thing to me is where those pictures come in. And I don't know, are we able to put the pictures up for people can see? I gave a thumb drive to someone.
Sure. Are those the pictures that you've passed out? I think
it's the pictures that I passed out, but I had a thumb drive as well so that everyone could see.
Okay. Yes, if you could pass the thumb drive over to our assistant.
Okay, I'll give you some background to the pictures while they're putting up the thumb drive. With all the electronic voting equipment, the poll pads, the ballot marking devices, the scanner, all of those pieces of equipment have these plastic numbered tag locks that secure them. The other thing that secures those is a chain of custody form or a recap form. That's how you know that the SD cards haven't been removed, that nothing's been tampered with. It's these numbered locks that protect all those items, and the chain of custody forms that are witnessed by two people verify the numbers on those locks. And as soon as you pull those plastic tabs out, they break and you can't reuse them. So if you were going to tamper, now you have a problem as long as there's a chain of custody form with two witnesses, because that's what proves what the lock number was. At the end of the night, the polling station closed and we were getting, packing up all the equipment, and it's a very arduous process. Every piece of equipment has these recap forms, these chain of custody forms. You're double checking the locks, you're relocking them, you're securing them, you're checking serial numbers and bagging them up in the case that matches the piece of equipment. It's a very rigorous setup so that you can ensure that you're locking up this electronic equipment in a way that it can't be tampered with at any given time. So at the end of the night, we go to empty these scanners. So the voter comes in, they present at the polling pad, they show their ID, we give them a green, like a credit card. They go over to the ballot marking device and they put it in their ballot marking machine. They electronically vote and mark who they want. Then it prints a paper ballot on that specialty paper, right? The voter then takes that specialty paper printed ballot, they carry it over to one of the scanner machines, and we ask them to look at the paper ballot and make sure that it shows who they voted for. That paper ballot is the safeguard. That's why we ask them to look at it so that they can confirm that's who they voted for. At that point, the voter puts it into the scanner where it's scanned electronically. The paper ballot then drops down into a large container, somewhat similar to like a garbage can, a big plastic garbage can. And all day long, all those paper ballots fall down into that container, all hodgepodge, every which way, and just collect in that. So at the end of the night, and that scanner is, and that container, that's protected with actually a couple of mechanical locks and a couple of numbered plastic security locks like those you see in the picture. So at the end of the night, the final task is to unlock those bins and collect all of those paper ballots that have fallen into that big container. We collect all of those. You look up inside and make sure none of them have been hung up. There are at least two witnesses for each of those bins, which there's two of those bins. We had 4 people plus a couple other people around, plus our local sheriff was there as well. So all these people are watching us take out these paper ballots, and we put them into these red canvas bags. It looks kind of orangey in the picture, but there was one red canvas bag per bin, and there was also the red canvas bag that held the provisional ballots that were brought in for that night. So we bring them in. These bags have a specialty zipper and then this flap lock so that that red numbered tab lock can go in them. So we get all the paper ballots into the red bags, zip them up, and I said, where are the number locks? And nobody could find the number locks. They'd gone missing. So I got the supervisor, Sarah's, attention, and I said, we need the number locks. And these locks are a little different configuration than the ones that go on the voting machines and stuff. They just click in there, and then if you pull it out, it breaks. So she said she didn't have any, and for us to just zip it up and throw them in the blue totes, which are the other pictures that you see, unsecured, and that would be good enough, and they would drive them to the election office, which is maybe between 10 and probably 10 to 12 minutes from our polling place. And I told her, no way, we are not loading these paper ballots into the back of your car with you and your friend to drive them to the election office. You call Robin at the election office and you tell her to have someone bring us the locks. She rolled her eyes, literally walked away, and I just sat there watching those ballots. I was not going to let those out of my sight. Me and another gal named Lori. There was a gal named Gloria. There was an elderly guy that I think had COPD because I brought him his oxygen and helped him out there. We sat there and watched those paper ballots to be sure they were secure until those numbered tag locks could come. So we waited about 20 minutes and they still hadn't come. So I flagged down our supervisor again and said, hey, is somebody bringing those tab locks? And she said,
Ms. Smith, can you wrap it up?
Yep.
We got a lot.
Okay, so she said, we don't need them. And I said, I'm not leaving here until you bring them. So finally, after my second request, they brought the numbered tab locks. And so I asked where the chain of custody forms were, and she said they didn't have any. And I said, it does no good to lock them without a chain of custody form. and she refused to do a chain of custody form and demanded that we throw them in her car. And that's when I took the pictures to document the numbers protecting those paper ballots. In my job as a nurse, if you send a urine drug screen to the lab and it's all sealed up, but you have no chain of custody form, they throw it away because the chain of custody form is what proves it hasn't been tampered with. Those bags left that place with the tags I pitched a fit on about and took pictures of, but no chain of custody form. I had no idea what would happen to them after they left that place. I followed the supervisor and her friend, and the sheriff made sure the bags got into the election office, went home, couldn't sleep. Well, I went actually to our poll worker who'd been kicked out's house, had a sleepless night. The next day, I went to the local election office and met with our local election authorities. They wouldn't listen. I gave them pictures of the tab locks, asked them, could we at least look at them and make sure they're still sealed and do a chain of custody form? They refused. He told me, Gary Hamilton, my commissioner on the election board, said it wouldn't matter if a couple 100 ballots went missing. That was the response from my local election office. And so here I knew that we had these unsecured. All our paper ballots were completely unsecured. Less secure than someone's urine drug screen, right? So then on the Friday, the 13th, when we go to do our initial count of the paper ballots, guess what? They come out of the back room in cardboard boxes, not in the bags I sealed on election night. And there's no chain of custody form. There is no documentation of what happened to those people's ballots between when I locked them up election night and when they walked out in cardboard boxes. I had to bite my tongue because I was a poll watcher and I couldn't take pictures, but there's a whole room full of people who could corroborate that they came out in cardboard boxes, not in those canvas bags. Now you tell me why they all cheered when the paper ballot count matched the machine count. It means nothing when you count paper ballots that have been handled, removed from their sealed containers, and no documentation of what happened to them in between. Counting paper ballots means zip, nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's infuriating, and I can't believe it happened.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Thank you very much.
Senator Jordan. Just a second.
Oh, one other point. I also counted the absentee. I watched for counting the absentee ballots. And one of the workers asked how they verified the signatures. And a little old lady stood up and said, oh, I verified 90% of them. One little old lady looks at all those absentee ballots and decides whose signature stays and whose signature goes. You tell me what oversight and verification process that is. I'm sorry.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. And so you were a poll worker in Hart County, Georgia?
Correct.
And with respect to the ultimate count there, isn't it true that President Trump won that county 9,465 votes to 3,100?
It is, which is remarkable. So the Trump team is willing to listen to me, someone who lives in a county where Trump won by a landslide, because I want to tell you, I don't give a rip who won. What matters to me is that the people's vote is more protected than their urine. Think about it. It doesn't matter who won. Those paper ballots were not secure. I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican. I don't care if you voted for Minnie Mouse. I don't care. The process is flawed when your urine is more protected than your vote. And that is what happened. And that's why I'm here, because you need to fix the holes that jeopardize every single person sitting in this chair. I don't care who they voted for. Those voters, I saw a woman lead her blind husband in to vote. I saw a man pull up in a big van and come out in his electric wheelchair to vote. Those are my voters. It's my job to protect their vote. It's your job as legislators to ensure that there are safeguards for their votes, and that when the law is broken and people don't follow the law, you're supposed to make sure that they do. That's your job. And it's not just my vote, it's yours too. Think about it. Your vote might not have counted either. Not a single person in this room. You don't know. You weren't there. I was there. I thank you for your time, and I hope you'll take what these people are telling you seriously. It's important. The people's voice matters in this country.
It does. Thank you for being here.
Can you clarify for me what happened? And I don't think I caught it. Were you able to vote in person?
Yes, sir.
Was it a provisional ballot or was it a regular ballot as far as you know your vote was counted?
As far as I know, it was a regular ballot.
Thank you. Did you have the opportunity to go onto the My Voter page to see when you allegedly requested your absentee ballot, when you allegedly voted by absentee? Have you had a chance to do that yet?
No, sir. I haven't gotten anything. When my mom called the voter center, she was told by someone on the phone that an absentee ballot was cast in my name on October 7th.
Great. Maybe I think we're going to have a break, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to plug your information in here. I don't want you to announce your date of birth to the world, but you can come enter it here. I'd like to see this because you are not the first person that we have heard of that has had this happen. And this to me is probably some of the most discouraging testimony.
Yes, sir.
This is probably your first or second presidential election you've had the opportunity to vote in, depending on when your birthday is.
Yes. My name's Grace. I'm 22 years old. I'm a senior at University of Georgia, and I live in Fulton County. So I came here to tell y'all my experience when I went and voted in person.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I went and I voted in person on October 23rd with my younger sister, who was a first-time voter. And when I went to check in and give them my license and verify my identity to get my voter card, I was told that there was an absentee ballot already out for me. But I never requested one. I've never voted absentee. I always go vote in person. And I had to sign an affidavit saying that I did not request an absentee ballot. So I got my voter card. I voted in person. Everything went fine after that. The next day, my mom called the voter center and was told that somebody voted absentee in my name on October 7th. We don't know who that is, and we haven't gotten any answers about that since. And on October 28th, I filled out an open records request for the Fulton County Voters Office. I received an email from Fulton County Registration Chief, Mr. Ralph Jones, and I called him. He asked about my experience, and he told me he was going to further investigate the situation and get back to me with more answers. On November 3rd, his assistant, Mariska Bodison, emailed me to say that my request was given to the Secretary of State's office for further investigation. I haven't heard anything else from either of them. Then I got an email from my dad's friend and lawyer, Mr. Bob Cheeley. I spoke with Mr. Cheeley on November 19th on the phone, and he wanted to know how the investigation was going. And I didn't know, so I tried to call around to find out more answers for him. And I couldn't get anyone on the phone. Once I did, in the Secretary of State's office, nobody had any answers for me. They hadn't seen my open records request, and they had no answers about how the investigation was going. Later, I spoke with Sharon Griffin in the elections office at the Secretary of State, but she couldn't tell me anything either. I never got another call back, and at this point, I was knowing that I was getting the runaround from everybody. November 23rd, I received an email that my open records request was never received by the Secretary of State's office and was asked to submit another one on their website. And I did so and emailed the officer back and told him that I did. There was no name attached to that email. It was just open records officer.
On November 30th, I received another email from the Open Records Officer in the Secretary of State's office to file a complaint. The last line of this email read, "This will serve as the final response to this request, and your request is now closed." We tried to call the Secretary of State's office again and couldn't get anybody on the phone. So I am left with still no answers. No one will answer the phone or call me back. And I want to know ultimately if my vote was counted or if the vote that was voted for me scratched my vote out.
That's a good. Thank you. Wow.
Senator Dolezal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Can you tell me your name again?
I'm Grace.
Grace, thanks for being here, Grace.
Thank you.
Judges to make sure to protect election integrity and compel the state legislatures to fulfill their constitutional obligations. So we're looking forward to continuing the fight, and President Trump, of course, is not giving up. He's very willing to defend election integrity, not only for the outcome of this election, but for every election in the future. It's so important to make sure that we protect our freedoms.